Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. I would like to start by asking you all to mute yourselves if you haven't already, and by letting you know that this session is being recorded. And if you wish to not be recorded, that's not a problem. Simply just keep your camera turned off. As well, this event will be translated by the lovely Paulina, and you can use the interpretation function at the bottom bar, which is a little globe icon, and switch between English and Spanish as per your preference. My name is Cecily O. I am the current operations manager at Sir Gallery. We're very happy to be able to host this virtual artist talk tonight with Erika Silva, from Memorarte and Tamara Marcos for the Hilos Conductores exhibition currently on view at Sir Gallery. Before I continue, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which Sir Gallery is placed is on the traditional territory of many indigenous nations. The area known as Takaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. Today, the meeting place of Takaronto is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are very grateful to have the opportunity as immigrants to this land to work and present here. I also want to acknowledge government arts funding, all of which supports our vision for a more diverse art scene in Toronto. So I would like to thank Canada Council for the Arts through their Digital Now program, the Ontario Arts Council, the Toronto Arts Council, and the City of Toronto through Section 37. I would also like to thank our sponsors, Ready to Post, and our videographer, Hofworks Production. And in particular, this exhibition is only made possible through the support of our partners at Agnes Etherington Art Centre out of Queen's University and the Textile Museum of Canada. I will now pass it over to Natalia Santos Ocasio, the curators of Hilos Conductores, to introduce the exhibition as well as the artists.
Yeah, thanks, Cecily. And I will just say that I might have to turn off my camera because I've been encountering some issues with it. So I apologize in advance, but I'll go as far as I can without turning it off. So hello and thank you for joining us tonight to learn more about some of the artists that who are participating in the collectives who are participating in the Hilos Conductores exhibition. As those of you who might have had the opportunity to, get acquainted or go visit the exhibition in Sur Gallery, might already know, this exhibition explores the threads that connect life in Chile with Canada in uneven ways, and the politics of place that emerge when we display Chilean arpilleras in downtown Toronto at almost 15 years of the Pinochet coup. Some of these connections between both countries, I think my camera might be acting up, so sorry. Some of these connections between both countries include copper mining, private water utilities, and other extractive schemes like industrial salmon fishing, but include also exile, art, and networks of transnational solidarity. To tease out these connections, the Hilos Conductores exhibition puts in conversation a sample of arpilleras created during the Chilean dictatorship from the Jubilee Crafts collection, together with the recent work of textile artists and collectives Belgica Castro, Soledad Muñoz, Tamara Marcos, Memorarte, and Autorregazo. Spanning 3 countries and various decades, the presentation of these works also seeks to honor generations of the textile artists and arpillera makers who have drawn on unsuspected materials like thread, fabric, and sewing needles to denounce human rights violations, free market economics, and extractivism. I also wanted to add that we're currently working on a virtual format for the exhibition, and we'll definitely share that with you when it's ready so that you can visit virtually, even if you don't have the chance to go to Toronto to see it in person. And with this, we have invited Erika from Memorarte and Tamara Marcos to further speak on their work that is currently being shown in the gallery and to talk to us a little bit about their artistic process more generally. I'll start with Erika. Erika Silva is a member of the Memorarte Collective, a collective based in Santiago de Chile, where the group has developed a distinctive style of large-scale textiles that are activated during marches, protests, and other public spaces. Memorarte's work has been displayed within Chile and around the world, and the group has partnered with different campaigns throughout the years, including with Greenpeace, to rally around the defense of water resources and against salmon fishing. And this is actually the theme of the piece that Memorarte is presenting in the Hilos Conductores exhibition. So I'm sure that Erika can speak a little bit more about that later. And just switching to Spanish very quickly. Yo conocí a Erika y a las demás chicas de Memorarte.
I met Erica and the team from the group from Memorarte in Santiago in 2020, and I saw firsthand how, on the canvas, they worked with political messages and shared them on the street. So it is a pleasure to be able to share this virtual space today. Thank you so much for
Muchas
accepting
gracias a
the
ti.
invitation. Thank you.
And now I'm just gonna introduce Tamara Marcos before leaving you guys with the artist. Tamara Marcos is a textile artist and researcher of pre-Columbian iconography and Latin American embroidery of indigenous peoples, as well as the founder of Trenza Textil Virtual School. Her work and academic preparation has developed between Chile and Argentina, where her textiles have also been displayed. Tamara currently resides in Chillán, in the Ñuble region in Chile, where she continues to develop her practice that links textiles, women's, and processes of decolonization.
And now I'll switch to Spanish. I first got to know Tamara's work before getting to know her personally. And the first piece of hers that I saw was Agua Dulce y Libre, which is the piece that's being exhibited here in
And
your
with that,
gallery.
I'll leave you with Erika Silva and Tamara Marcos. Thank you so much.
Bueno, ¿cuántos minutos tengo para ser muy
Erica asked,
justa?
how much time do I have? Just to make sure I keep an eye on the time.
30.
Quiero saber cuántos minutos tengo para hablar.
30 minutos.
Oh, ok. Bueno, primero que nada, y si hablo muy rápido.
First of all, and if I speak too quickly, please let me know. I tend to speak quickly. I'll try to not speak too quickly. Thank you so much, Natalia. Thank you for inviting me. I would also like to recognize and say thank you, Natalia, because when Natalia was in Chile, a lot of people were leaving Chile. Our gallery at that time was the street, in the middle of a social uprising, and Natalia lived about 2 blocks from the core of downtown where the social uprising was taking place. And her commitment with art that gives life meaning and changes history, is a very high commitment. And that's why Natalia was very well received in our workshop and in our community. I'm also a professor at the university, part of the School of Medicine in Valparaiso. I do other things besides embroidery and also work on public policy. However, we know that art is a political language, and it's a political language that, in case of Memorarte, has the aim of changing public policy, of having an impact without avoiding confrontation on the street at the same time. That's why I would also like to acknowledge Natalia, because she was there where people were risking their lives. It wasn't just anywhere. And she was very brave, and she accompanied us in those spaces too, because this was a struggle for Chile, and she's not from Chile, but she was deeply committed, and that was very meaningful for us. My name is Erika Silva. I'm a professor, a teacher, and I work on public policy. I'm part of I work at the Valparaiso University.
expandir los márgenes de los bordes de lo que hemos aprendido que es un cuerpo
I also
humano.
work on photography
Y soy
projects with
una de
women,
las
with a
fundadoras
diversity of
y
women. I'm one of the
Memorarte.
founders
Vemos
and
a la
directors of
compañera
Memorarte.
realizando
Here in the
nuestro
photo,
trabajo.
you can see
Quien
some of my
aparece de izquierda a derecha es Erika Silva, Pamela
colleagues.
Monasterio,
There's Erika
Jimena,
Silva,
Astrid Pozo, Alejandra
Astrid
Campos,
Pozo,
Ana
Alejandra
Reyes y falta
Campos,
ahí Jimena Fernández que no pudo
Ana Reyes, and
participar.
Jimena, who was not able to
Nosotros
be
nos
there that
dedicamos a
day.
hacer hace 7 años aproximadamente,
About 7 years
dedicamos
ago,
a
we
hacer
started
bordado político
doing
y un
political
bordado político
embroidery.
que emerge de la tradición chilena
And
que
this comes from a
incluye
Chilean
Violeta
tradition
Parra en su
that
poesía
comes
Bordar contra la
from
guerra,
Violeta Parra's work
como
titled Bordar
un
contra
escape
la
a un
guerra,
bordado
Embroidery Against
decorativo,
War.
¿sí? Para todas las
And it's a
investigadoras
departure
a
from
lo largo del
decorative
mundo. Y tengo bueno, yo tengo la suerte
embroidery.
de ser colaboradora de investigación
I'm also a
con el Murray University, con la
research
Universidad de
collaborator
Cambridge, con la
with
doctora Dillon.
Cambridge University
Eh, eh,
with Professor Dillon.
parte con Violeta Parra, como decía, y todas las investigadoras lo saben también de sobra. Ese hilo se extiende al periodo de dictadura con el bordado de
And that thread
alfarería
goes
que
back to
crean,
the period of the
por una parte, las
dictatorship,
mujeres que
to the
sufrían la pobreza de la
textiles that
dictadura,
women in
poblaciones
situations of poverty would create.
vulnerables, pobres en
These
Chile,
are women
pero
who were
también
very poor, who were very
familiares de
vulnerable,
detenidos desaparecidos, de
but
presos
also
políticos,
families of people
exiliados,
who had been disappeared,
en ese
victims,
medio, que es
people
un
who
medio
had
para
been
mí,
exiled, started
profesora,
working
muy
with these
democrático, porque
textiles
en todas las
artilleras. And I think
casas
it's very
hay
important because in the
ropa
streets
vieja, o hay
and in
aguja, o hay
homes,
tijera, o hay
there's
forma, y no es
always
nada muy
old
extraño
cloth,
ni
old
extravagante para poder
clothes,
expresarse.
needles, threads. You don't need
Nosotros somos
anything out of
en
this world
Chile,
to
la
be able to
dictadura,
express yourselves.
teoría,
The
duró hasta el
dictatorship in
89,
Chile,
desde el
in
73
theory,
al 89,
lasted it from
y
73
desde el
until
89 hasta
89.
ahora
And
hemos
from
vivido una
89
democracia
until now,
algo
we
laxa, con
have
algunas
been
grietas.
in
Somos la cuna del sistema neoliberal,
democracy.
un
However,
neoliberalismo
we're
muy
in the
profundo.
heart of
Somos un
the
país rico,
neoliberal
un
system.
país
It's
desigual,
a very
donde
rich country, but also a
muchas
very
diferencias
unequal
entre los
country.
ricos
There are a lot of
y los
differences
que ganan
between
poco.
a small number of people who
Por lo
make a lot of
tanto,
money and then
esa
people
fricción
who don't have
social
access
y
to
esas
rights
deudas,
and
sobre todo con la
resources.
justicia,
Therefore, that friction,
generan grandes
that specifically
rabias.
with justice, has
Esas
generated a
rabias
lot of
finalmente
anger.
estallaron
That
en el
anger
2018, ¿verdad?
came to a head
De una forma que finalmente llevó a que podamos cambiar nuestra constitución, que era una constitución que se había hecho para
to the moment
garantizar
when we
más
started to try and
democracia
change our
neoliberal,
constitution and
particularmente.
to change that the
Entonces,
neoliberal roots of the
esto
constitution.
pasó en el 2018, pero durante
That
mucho
happened in
tiempo hubo
2018.
muchas
However, during that time,
organizaciones de
there
diferentes
were many
índole, culturales,
organizations,
sociales,
artistic,
políticas,
cultural, social,
gremiales,
political,
sindicales, que
academic, and
presionaron
union
ese cambio. Y era un
organizations
cambio que no
that
era tan
were
fácil porque uno podría
creating
decir,
pressure.
lo comprenderán probablemente quienes están familiarizados con Chile,
Those of
un
you
país
that are
diverso,
familiar
donde
with
de izquierda
Chile,
también
people
gobernó.
from the
El
left
tema es
were
que esas
also
personas
in
fueron
power in
capturadas
Chile,
por el
but those
sistema,
people were
no
then
fueron tan
captured
profundos como la
by a
gente
system. So the
exigía o
changes were
esperaba.
not as deep as the
Por lo tanto,
people
este
wanted
país
or
sí
hoped.
alcanzó buenos indicadores de desarrollo según el
Our
Banco
country
Mundial,
has
¿verdad?
reached,
Pero
according to the World
esos
Bank, very good
indicadores con
indicators in terms
respecto
of development.
a la
But
repartición
in,
de esos recursos.
when we look at the
Entonces había como
administration or how
varios
those resources have
de
been
un modelo
administered,
que era muy
then
ejemplar, de que aquí
it
estaba
has
todo
not
muy
been so
bien, de que la
positive.
gente viajaba,
There was
inmigraba,
this
teníamos
idea that
grandes
everything
tasas de
was well,
empleo,
people
migrantes
were
que llegaron
immigrating,
a
traveling,
Chile con
and
altas
immigrants
expectativas,
were
porque
arriving in
hay muchas
Chile
cosas
with
que
very
se
high
justifican, pero hay
expectations.
muchas cosas que
Some things
funcionan
work
mal.
very well in Chile, but
Entonces,
there are
quien
also a lot
decía
of
que eso
things that
funcionaba mal
don't
era
work
como
well.
que era
And those who were
exagerado
critical of the
o
things in
criticaba de
Chile
más o
were
era
considered
muy
to be exaggerating or overly
inconformista.
critical
Bueno,
or
esa gente inconformista en realidad era harta,
perpetually
porque
dissatisfied.
hay muchas cosas
And
que
there
se
were a
sufren
lot of people who were
innecesariamente,
being critical because a lot of
algunas
people were
becas, por
suffering
ejemplo, el estudio
unnecessarily.
extractivismo,
For
justamente que es
example,
una de las cosas
extractivism,
en donde vamos a focalizar
which is one of
en
the
la
subjects
presentación,
that will go
donde
into
todos
more
nuestros recursos
detail.
minerales
Our
y
mineral
marinos
resources,
y todos los recursos naturales
our
eran
maritime resources,
acaparados por
and our
los
natural
propietarios,
resources were
teniendo
being
grandes réditos
exploited
económicos,
by
pero
companies
destruían el medio ambiente también.
while destroying the
Entonces,
environment.
otro de los ejemplos es que la educación en Chile no es gratuita,
The
tienes
education
que
in
pagar
Chile,
y si
for
no pagas no
example,
estudias.
is not
Y otro
free.
de
And
los
if someone
ejemplos
can't
es que
pay,
las
they don't
pensiones
have
cuando
access to
uno
education.
llega a una edad adulta son bastante
And for
porque haber trabajado
example,
toda la vida y tenemos poca cobertura de derechos
the
de tal
support that
forma
people
que
receive
lo
when
poco que
they
se gana
retire
finalmente
is
rinde poco.
very low. So
Entonces ese
the
descontento
money that people make,
es
they
bien
end up
masivo.
spending on health.
Eh, eh,
We started to see a
Como dicen
massive
los
movement,
abogados, a
a massive
contrarreconciliario, valga el
dissatisfaction.
latín, ¿verdad? Por el contrario de lo que decían la clase
And in
política.
contrary to what the
Entonces existía
political
esta
class was saying,
divergencia.
we're seeing a lot of
Y esta
critiques
divergencia es
and
interesante
opposition and
porque
resistance. And we start to see a very
para sobrevivir de un
interesting
sistema
kind of
capitalista,
resistance. In order to survive
te
in a
inoculan lo
capitalist
que te
system,
meten en la cabeza, que tú tienes
what
que ser
they
una persona
put in
competitiva
your
y
head,
egoísta.
what they
Y te va a
inculcate,
ir relativamente bien en términos económicos.
is
No
for
importa
you to
vender tu
be
vida a los demás.
selfish.
No
You
tienes
have
tiempo
to sell
libre,
your life to the
probablemente
system.
si
You
alcanzas a
have
tener una
free
profesión que te haga
time.
ganar bien, vas a poder comprar cosas, pero
And if you
finalmente
marry
siempre hay
someone,
esta
yes, you'll be able to purchase
sensación
some
de
things and have some
hastío que escribe
projects, but
Shulhan, ¿verdad?
there
Un
will
filósofo
always
coreano.
be this
Esta sensación de ser
sense
esclavo de los
of
impulsos.
being a
Si no
slave,
eres esclavo del sistema, eres
that's
esclavo de ti
described
mismo.
by a
Y la
Korean
psicopolítica
philosopher.
te mete en la cabeza la mejor explotación. Ni siquiera te controlan de afuera,
You're
te controlan de adentro.
exploited.
Tú tienes, te
You're
exiges para
exploited
ti mismo.
internally, mentally, and
Y
you
es
demand
interesante
a lot,
porque
too much from
eh,
yourself. This
hay
is
una
interesting
frase
because there's
propia de la epistemología del sur, ¿verdad? Que
a
siempre
phrase
dicen
from
que otro mundo es posible.
Southern
Y la verdad
epistemology
es que ese
that
mundo
says
es
another
posible,
world is possible.
esa declaración tiene que ver o
And
pareciera
that
delinear
declaration
con el futuro. Yo creo que otro mundo es
seems to
posible
be
con lenguajes
referencing the
paralelos. Y a ver si
future,
tú me
but
lo
I
puedes
think
imaginar.
that the future is like a
Una
parallel
manera
line.
de imaginar
Sometimes it's
eso
difficult to
es
imagine that. One way of
como pasaba en
imagining
dictadura.
that
Por
is
ejemplo,
what
si uno
was
le
happening
pregunta a
during the
personas que tenían una
dictatorship.
militancia o participaban en organizaciones
For
políticas en tiempos
example,
de
people
dictadura
who were
dura, donde
part
la
of
vida estaba en peligro
political
incluso,
organizations and
describen
when their
muchas
lives were
lazos
in
de
danger,
compañerismo.
they talk a
Viven
lot
experiencias de
about
compartir lo poquito que
solidarity.
tú tenías.
They
Y
speak
describen
about
esa
sharing what little
posibilidad
you have.
de un eros
And
político
they
con el salto cuántico
describe
de incluso dar la vida por lo que tú quieres. Y eso se
this
respeta
willingness
dentro de
to
esa
give
teoría.
your life
Yo
for
creo que la
something that you
democracia
believe
también pasó
in.
esto.
I think that has also happened
Pasaba esto de que
during the
puedes
period of
competir, puedes
democracy.
ser la persona que te hagas millonaria y puedes tener muchos empleados y qué
Beyond
sé
this
yo, y
aspect
viajar
of
y tener
having
y
all the
llenarte de
employees
dinero,
that you want and spending
pero
all the
también
money that
existía
you
el
want and
otro. No me interesa ese
traveling
mundo.
all the time.
Me
But
interesa el
there's
mundo donde
also
la gente
another
colabora,
side
no
where
desde
people are
desde
not
que compite.
interested
Y
in
esas
that. I'm
personas no éramos tan
interested
pocas
in
como
where
creemos.
people collaborate. And that group of people was not
Y
as
parte de
small as they were
organizarse
leading us to believe.
para nosotros era mostrar esa forma de vida. Y
And
esa,
when we
esa forma de
started
vida se muestra
organizing ourselves, we started to
actualmente,
show
especialistas políticos
that
públicos,
lifestyle and those
desde,
values.
desde este cuerpo distinto que es la sociedad red, a través de la red. Natalia nos conoce no porque iba pasando y un día nos vio, no porque, y probablemente las que nos conocen de otros países porque han visto, no han visto en redes sociales,
And
no
this
han
was
tomado
all
nunca
through a
una
network. And
carpilla
there
de
were a lot of
aceptación, como
people
Podrigo
at
dijo
that time.
en su gallery, pero las demás solamente la han visto con imágenes. Por lo tanto, el poder de la imagen era súper fuerte y eso
The
nosotros lo
image at
usábamos.
that time was very,
Pero
very
otro espacio que
powerful.
también
Images were
ocupamos es
very
la calle.
powerful. And so we started using
Y la calle
images
para
in our
qué?
work,
Para
and we also
defender
started
desde lo
occupying
esencial,
public
desde todos los
space.
derechos que tienen que
Public
ver con las
space
igualdades, con las mujeres, en
has
la
to do with all
conversación
the
pública y la
rights,
toma de decisiones,
with
y
women's,
también con la
with
defensa de los recursos
decision
naturales.
making, and with
Es por eso
access
que
to
nosotros
natural
elegimos
resources. That's why we
hacer
began
una pieza, porque hace unos años atrás,
to
bueno, no
create
vamos a
a
decir
certain
excesivamente,
space.
solo que fue con mucho mayor impacto en el 2017 o
In
2018,
2017,
murieron muchos salmones
2018,
en el mar.
a lot of salmon died
Murió
in
un
the ocean,
desastre el
and it was a
mar.
disaster. It was an
Se
ecological
pudrió el
disaster.
pescado literalmente y
And the
esa
fish
pudrición del
became
seabed
rotten,
dañó aún más el
and
fondo
that
marino. El fondo las
harmed
salmoneras
the
tienen poca
seabed even
posibilidad de ser
more.
sustentables.
Salmon farms
Y no es
can
que vaya
hardly be
a ofrecer
sustainable,
mayores
and
garantías.
our
Por ejemplo, si
country
ustedes ven en esa pieza hay
offers
un
benefits
logo
for
que es una hojita de Canadá,
salmon
porque muchos
farms.
países que ocupan esas
You can
garantías y
see in this
ofrece este
image a
país
logo from
para hacer
Canada
acuerdos comerciales,
because
es que da mayores garantías a las empresas para depredar el fondo marino.
there
¿Sí?
are greater
Y ese espacio lo
opportunities for
utilizan por
companies to
ende
take advantage and
noruegas
exploit the
y
seabed
canadienses.
in our
¿La culpa
country.
es de
And
los
that
canadienses? No, la culpa la tenemos nosotros,
Norwegian
porque
and
nosotros
Canadian
tuvimos esa
companies take
posición
advantage of those
nosotros
opportunities. And it's not the fault of the
Estado,
Norwegians
no
or the
nosotros.
Canadians.
Yo, Erika
It's
Silva,
our
sino que el
government
Estado,
that
el
is
Estado
creating
neoliberal ofrece las
that
posibilidades para que
exploitation in our
de alguna
country.
manera los empresarios, incluso extranjeros, puedan generar en la lógica del
Foreign
discurso
companies
siempre bien recibido de ofrecer oportunidades y
are
empleos,
well received under the context of
sacar
opportunity
ganancias
and providing
bastante
employment,
suculentas que no
and
pueden tener
they
en
gain
sus países porque
profits
los marcos
from
regulatorios son mucho más exigentes, pero sí
our
tenemos
country,
la
which they
legalidad.
can't gain. This is
El rol
profit they can't gain
democrático
in
ha
their
sido
own
denunciar y
countries.
evidenciar
because they're
esto
much
como
more
un trabajo en
stringent
alianza con Greenpeace,
guidelines.
porque
With Memorarte, we've also worked with
apoyamos también a las
Greenpeace and
comunidades
we
de pueblos
support
originarios de la Patagonia, al pueblo
indigenous
Ahuesca,
communities in
que ellos han
Patagonia,
defendido siempre
the Aguesca community.
el fondo marino. El
They
fondo
have
marino se
always
degrada,
protected the
deja de
seabed.
existir, deja de
The
existir. Pero no
seabed is
solamente el fauna marina.
completely destroyed
Hay una
with the use
frase
of
que incluso en la
salmon
organización que
farms.
dice, sin azul no hay verde. O sea, si no hay mar
And there's a phrase
es
that
imposible, un
says,
poco van a ver
without the
bosques,
blue, there's no
todo muere,
green,
todo
which
es,
means that without
está
the oceans,
completamente ligado una cosa con la
won't
otra.
be able to have a
Por lo tanto,
forest.
para nosotros era súper importante poder mostrar esta pieza
This piece was
y
very
tomar
important for
conciencia
us.
con respecto a todos nos gusta comer salmón. A mí también me gusta comer salmón, yo no digo que
I
no,
also like to eat
pero hay
salmon.
formas en donde puede ser
So we
menos
wanted to raise awareness and talk about ways in which salmon can be
pueden haber algunas
harvested
funciones que
without being
mejoren
so
esa relación
destructive.
de la empresa
And
con el fondo
we're
marino.
interested in looking
No,
at
no
ways to
completamente,
improve the relationship
o sea,
between the
es
company
falso también decir eso,
and
¿no?
the
Pero sí se
ocean,
pueden
not
mitigar a lo
completely.
menos
A
algunos de
lot
los
of things can
grandes
be
riesgos
mitigated. A lot of the main
sufren los
risks
ecosistemas
that the
con el
ecosystems
engordamiento,
face
o sea,
in the context of salmon farming can be
con la
mitigated.
creación de estas, se hacen como unas especies como de jaulas en el mar, donde
With salmon
efectivamente las
farming, there
corrientes
are
súper
cages that are
apretadas, digamos,
placed in the
y
ocean.
además botando sus
The
peces al
salmon
fondo
are
marino,
crammed
y eso es lo que de alguna
together.
manera va dañando este ecosistema.
There's a concentration
Entonces,
of biological matter, and
si
then
uno
that harms the
piensa o se
seabed.
posiciona desde entender, como dice Alfredo Yar, uno de los más grandes artistas visuales de Chile y de
Alfredo Yar,
Latinoamérica,
he was a very important
entiende el arte
artist
como un
in
arma
Chile.
de la paz,
He
que tal
understands
vez
art
algunos
as a
entienden
weapon
contraction,
for peace,
arma
and
de
there's
paz, es como
this
raro, digamos,
contract, this
pero sí
contradiction of
lo
a
que nosotros
weapon
creemos es que es un
and
lenguaje
peace.
que le permite a
What
los
we believe
humanos,
it's a language that
primero,
allows humans,
gozar en plenitud de
firstly,
lo que significa ser humano, en el
to
sentido más
completely enjoy
amplio.
what it means to be
El ser
human in the
artista tiene
broadest
una
sense.
connotación particular
Being an artist
de algunos seres de esta especie humana, ¿verdad? Que tienen alguna
is
joyita
a
en la frente,
specific
pero no son
condition
defectuosos,
of the human
sino más bien es
species.
la capacidad de tener
That's one
múltiples
way
lenguajes
to
de uso
look
del
at it.
oral y
But
el
the way
lenguaje
we
para
look at it
expresar
is that
lo que se siente.
there's multiple languages,
Y
and art
entre
is
eso
one
se
language
refiere
amongst
rabia,
many,
a
one
tener un
way to express
sentimiento que
oneself.
es propio de los
And
humanos.
feeling
Y
anger
causar
is
esta rabia,
also just,
acciones de no violencia, creemos que es una buena
and it's
promesa de
part of
paz.
being human.
Ahora, esa no violencia puede ser muy confrontacional también desde el arte.
Now, a position of no
Somos medianamente
non-violence can
problemas
also
con la
be
idea de
very
nuestras piezas, no todo el
confrontational.
mundo nos quiere, no somos medallita
We've
de oro,
had problems
que todo el
by
mundo nos quiera.
presenting some of our
Sí creemos
pieces
que en
as well.
particular con las mujeres, en sistemas patriarcales, donde son
In
bastante
patriarchal
oprimidas
systems
con
where
respecto a
women
sus
are
deseos,
oppressed
anhelos
in
y
terms
sueños,
of their desires, their
expandir
hopes,
esos
and their
vórtices
dreams,
con respecto
by
a
expanding
su
the
protagonismo
borders
social,
in terms
cultural
of
y
the
político,
role that they play
creemos
socially,
que
culturally, and
el arte
politically,
textil sirve para
we
eso.
believe
Sirve
that
para
textile art
dos o tres
can play an
razones.
important role in
Una
that sense. There's
es
also two
que
other points why
cuando
it's
tú creas
meaningful. When you
sola, en la soledad de tu casa,
create
ya es un
alone
acto
in your home,
liberador,
that in
porque
and
hay
of
algo que estaba
itself
dentro
is a
tuyo, se
freeing
transforma en
act.
una
It's an
pieza
act of
y
freedom.
se
There's
vende,
something that was inside of
¿cierto?
you that is then
Se vuelve
transformed into
doblemente
a piece of art and it's externalized.
valioso cuando
Secondly,
además lo haces
it
con otra
becomes
mujer,
even more valuable
porque
when
en
you
estas
do it with
conversaciones,
other women,
este
because in
nutrir la
these
práctica, de ponernos de
conversations and
acuerdo en qué queremos mostrar
practicing
en un lienzo o empiezas por
together
dibujar, pero más
and
cuando hay
talking
dos
about
personas
what you
tomando y
want
tengo
to
que ponerme de
express on a
acuerdo con los
canvas,
otros para
and
hacer un lienzo
then
que
you have to
vendiendo ahora,
come to an agreement
esta
with other women
convergencia de
about what
ideas.
you want
Y
to
eso es un
express.
acto
There's a
político,
convergence of
decidir qué
ideas,
vamos
and
a
that
hacer. Pero
is a
además,
political
cuando lo
act to
llevas
decide
a
what
la
we're going to do
calle,
together. And
existe
then when you
otro
take that to
horizonte
the
que es
street,
distinto,
there's
porque
another level.
entiendes, porque lo que sucede, y Natalia
Because
es
what
un testigo
happens,
de eso,
and
porque nosotros
Natalia has
vamos
been
a
a
las
witness of this,
nuestros
when
lienzos,
we go out
tienes un
onto the street
reconocimiento
with our
público con
canvases,
respecto a lo que tú
there's
estás
public
haciendo, que no se
recognition
obtiene
for what
con
you're doing.
tanta facilidad o con tanta masividad como
And
lo
that's
ocurre en
not
galería, porque en la
something that
galería
something that's not as
tu
easily
audiencia es
obtained in a
bendecida.
gallery.
Cuando tú
In a
estás en la
gallery, the
calle,
audience that sees
inevitablemente,
your work is only the
tú vas a
people who
una
decide to
marcha
go to the
o
gallery,
si
but
vas
in
a
the
un
street,
espacio,
it's
no
just
sé, de una
everybody
repartición
is your
pública,
audience. If you're a part of a
un edificio
match
del
or
gobierno,
a
no
protest
necesariamente te van
or
a ver.
in front
O
of a
si vas a una
government
obra de
building,
teatro
people will
donde va
see
otra
you.
cosa y tú llegas
Or
con tu
if you
lienzo,
go
ellos te
to
van a decir, ¿qué es eso?
the
Y se van a
theater,
sentar
there's
atrás,
a
no te van a mirar o
show,
simplemente no dice
and
nada y
people
nos
will
prende algo.
see you.
Incluso nos pasa que la gente llora
on the way to the theater. Sometimes people just cry because they're so deeply moved by what they're seeing.
con respecto
So those three steps,
a cómo
those
la vida de
three
una mujer
levels
cambia
in terms of how a woman's
al
life
expandir su
changes
capacidad
by
creativa,
expanding
creemos que se
her
parece a eso que
creative
describimos como el
capacity
buen vivir.
and creative ability. That's what we describe in
Tal vez
Spanish as
ponérselo
buen
feliz
vivir,
como eso que,
the
que viene
right
en algún
to
momento. Y casi, como dice
a good
Galeano,
life.
esta utopía que tú le
And
vas
as Galeano
acercando
says,
paso y a
it's a
paso, no sé si
utopia that
completamente, pero en realidad para
is
lo que
always
sirve es
ahead of
parar,
you,
¿sí? Porque
but
nunca
what
lo vas a alcanzar.
its function is to
Pero
keep you
pareciera ser que
moving
ese buen
forward
vivir
because you'll
también es
never reach it. But
ese
that buen
transcurso,
vivir,
ese caminar, ese
that process,
dirigirse hacia
that
algo.
walking towards
Al menos
something,
mi vida ha sido mucho
at
más
least in
feliz
my
cuando
case,
he
I've
integrado
been
en mi
much
vida
more
cotidiana
happier when I've
lo
integrated
mismo
in my
o
everyday
mayor,
life
o sea, con mayor satisfacción aún
and I've
cuando
felt even more
con esto llevo pan a mi
satisfied
casa, o sea, con esto vivo de esto, ¿sí?
when I
¿Y
can
a qué me parecía
integrate
esa
this into
satisfacción?
different
Cuando
areas of
yo
my
no
life.
necesariamente ganaba dinero, sino cuando
And
simplemente
for me,
realmente
it's
tenía
not
algo así
about
como un
making
respiro,
money.
como una
These
cápsula
kinds
en
of
medio de la
spaces
voz,
represent a space
desde el
free,
espacio para poder crear y
a
crear con
space
otros.
for relief, to be able
Otra
to
cosa que
create
creemos
and
en
create with
Memorarte
other
que es muy
women.
importante,
Something
y lo
else
dejo
that
también
we
porque
believe
sé
in
que gran
Memorarte
parte de la audiencia son alumnos de nosotros de la comunidad Memorarte, eh, el interés por adquirir las herramientas para
the
poder
interest
multiplicar este trabajo y esta
in
manera de vivir
accessing the
en otros
tools to
países.
be able to replicate
Entonces,
this
parte
work in
importante de lo
different
que hace
countries too.
Memorarte es hacer
An
un buen
important
taller.
part of
De
what
hecho,
we do
pensamos en
is to
hacer ahora
organize
uno
a lot of
grande y al frente
workshops.
del
We
Palacio de
just finished
Gobierno.
one
Lo
in
vamos a
front of
hacer
the
nuevamente
main
no al
government
frente del
building,
Palacio de Gobierno
and we're
el lunes
going to
para
do it
poder
again
tener
on
menos
Sunday in the very seat of
para
power
empezar a
on the
preparar lo que
street.
vamos a
We
llamar
offered a free
para el
workshop,
8 de marzo, que es una
and
fecha
we'll
muy
start
importante
sharing
para
what
Chile porque
we'll
las marchas
be
son muy
presenting
grandes
on
y
March
generalmente
8th, because
obtenemos
March 8th
muchos
is a very
registros
important
fotográficos
date for us. There are a
de
lot of
nuestros lienzos,
marches, and
¿verdad?
we have a lot of
En,
photos of our
esas marchas.
canvases and our cloths
Así
as part
que
of those marches.
yo creo que este Chile, bueno, que se describe en el acto, la acción curatorial que tiene ahí los conductores,
The
justamente muestra
Chile
una
that's
línea continua, es como la
described
espiral unida,
as
lo único
part
que
of
le
this
falta es
exhibit
mostrar
is
el
like a
arte
thread
con
that
fondo,
you
¿verdad?
pull
De
and
las
pull, and there's
mujeres
this
de Bélgica
continuum
Castro,
through
quien
this
además yo
different
admiro, es
struggles,
una
through
persona que, porque
Castro,
son
through
pocas bordadoras,
their
pero entonces
few
siguen bordando con el frenesí que
embroiderers
lo hace la Bélgica
who
Castro y además tienen sello
continue
propio. Porque en general hay
in that
como,
style.
yo no soy crítica de arte ni pienso en eso, pero,
I'm not an
y me
art
posiciono siquiera por un rato en
critic,
eso, pero si hay
and I
algo
don't
que
even
uno
think in that sense.
puede describir desde una apreciación muy simple. El sello de Bélgica Castro es un sello que tú ves y sabes que es de Bélgica Castro. Es como,
If
aunque
you
no lo
see a
viste, hay
piece by
evidencia, sé que es
Belgica
Bélgica.
Castro,
Las
you
marcas en
immediately
general son
know
muy
it's by
parecidas,
her.
¿sí? Tienen los monitos, tienen la cordillera, tienen el
And
arbolito,
other
tienen las
styles
cajitas
of the
asociadas.
arpilleras are
Sin embargo,
also
ellas tienen un sello de ellos
similar.
propio que lo han mantenido en el
However,
tiempo. Y eso
Belgica
para
Castro's
alguien que
signature
es nueva en esto, yo
is
soy,
always identifiable.
aparte yo digo, yo soy profe, para mí como dicen los colegas, los profesores, para mí esto es un recurso educativo. O sea, esto es una forma de educar,
And for me,
como
this
es
is a
un
way
pizarrón, como es una página
teaching,
web,
just like a
son
chalkboard
formas de tener
or a
diferentes
website. It's a different way of
lenguajes para conmover,
having
porque uno
different
aprende no
languages,
solo desde un punto de vista cognitivo, revisando
because we
qué
learn
es
not only through
lo que
cognitive
siente, cómo
processes,
hago
but
que
we also learn through what we
este
feel.
espacio genere un cambio finalmente, ¿sí?
And the idea is for
Para nosotros es un honor haber trabajado
these
y haber
spaces to
diseñado
have
los
an
viajes de
impact, to
Hueso
create
aquí en
change. It's been
Patagonia.
an honor for us
Entregamos
to
muchos
work with
paquetes
Indigenous
en alianza con
communities in
Greenpeace.
Patagonia.
Entregamos
We've
también
also worked with
galardones para justamente
Greenpeace.
valorar su defensa, porque uno dice, pero la
We
Bélgica
wanted
Castro
to
lo estamos
recognize
representando en
all
Chile,
their
¿en qué
work,
parte
their
de la historia?
struggles, and their
En todo
defense.
lado.
And some people in Chile might think that Patagonia is very
Días
far, and
en
it
el
is
auto para
far.
poder
It
llegar a ese
takes
lugar,
days to drive
pero
to
todo está
Patagonia,
junto al final,
but it's all
¿sí?
part of the
Y
same
además
thing at
todos
the
los
end.
modelos se empiezan a replicar en la medida que
And
resuenan
all
con
those
intenciones. Por
models
lo
can
tanto,
continue to
la lógica de depredar
repeat
desde un punto de
themselves.
vista de la
That
actividad humana es
logic, that
naturalizada.
predatory
Caso está
logic,
sueldos
is
precarios
deeply
también los que
rooted
tienen
in our
efectivamente
system.
algunos dueños del
For
capital.
example, people
Por
have
lo tanto, para
precarious
nosotros
income
esta
in a
lógica
capitalist
nos da mucho
system.
sentido porque en el
Therefore,
fondo de
this
alguna
logic
manera
makes sense for us.
pasamos como desde
We
el
go
lenguaje que
from
era muy
a
privado y
language that was
clandestino en
very
tiempos de
private
dictadura,
and
con papeles
clandestine
bordados de
during the
arpilleras, ¿verdad?
dictatorship
De
with
aquel
the
entonces,
first
con bordados de
embroideries
ahí, la única
to
vocación que
embroideries
tenían
like
era
the one
tallar
you
en la
see
tela.
now.
Da lo mismo
And
si
it's
se ensucia. Da lo mismo
its
si se rompe
only
un vidrio
purpose
y la
is to be
policía
present in the
le
street.
echa
Doesn't
gas
matter
a
if
la
it gets
carretera,
dirty,
o
if
si
the
porque
police spray it with
la benzina al
gas,
gas te sale
or
muy
if
bien por
it's
la nariz y esa es la
destroyed,
que tienes que
or
limpiar
if you have been sprayed with
para no
gas and you
ponerte a
need
llorar o
to
para no
uh,
desmayarte,
use a
¿sí?
cloth to wipe
Porque es
yourself. It
arte que
doesn't
no
matter
tiene
because this is a
como
kind of
fin ni
art
preservarse,
that isn't meant to
ni
be
estar guardado de
preserved.
una manera
It's
muy
not
particular,
meant to
con algunas
be
consideraciones
stored in a
religiosas
very
que te cuento, por eso
specific or detailed way.
se
It
pierde o
doesn't
se rompe
matter.
o se
And if it's
destruyó o se
lost, if
rompió y se
it's
rajó. Era para
stolen
la
or
calle, era para la calle.
torn, it doesn't matter
Sí,
because
tal vez eso
this
es
work of art is
lo
for
que
the
nos
street.
hace
It's for the
tener
people.
un sello particular, ni mejor ni peor que otras bordadoras,
And what
pero
gives
que
us our
sí
own signature, our own
es lo que al menos
signature
nos permitió
style
estar en estos diferentes espacios y ser reconocida por gente que sí se dedica a eso,
means
que
that we're
que se
also
preocupa por la
recognized by
divulgación del
people
arte,
who
por arte
participate in
polémico.
these spaces.
Y me quedan 9 minutos, ¿sí? No,
I think I have
7 minutos.
9 minutes.
¿7
Is that
minutos?
correct? Or
¿Sí?
7 minutes?
Bien.
Yes.
Ok.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Entonces, para nosotros, bueno, y también quería describir que
And I
para
also
nosotros
would
la puesta
like
en
to
escena es algo
describe
muy
the
importante.
fact
Como pueden ver
that
ahí, nosotros tenemos trajes. Esos
the
trajes
mise en œuvre is
no son de
very important for
Guantánamo. Mucha
us.
gente dice son de Guantánamo porque si van a otros
These
países les
suits that we're
recomiendo
wearing
los
in this
trajes de
photo are
Chile.
not from
Son
Guantanamo. A lot
en
of people
Chile
think
el
they're from
traje que
Guantanamo,
usan
but
es
no.
el overol
But
que usan
these
estos
are the
trabajadores de la luz.
overalls that
Trabajos más sencillos. Por ejemplo, quien
people
recoge la basura puede usar un
work, for
traje de eso.
example,
Lo que nosotros hacemos es
garbage
teñirlos,
cleaners, workers,
¿sí?
and what we do is an
Entendiendo que esto
intervention.
es
We
una opción
embroider
también
them
que tiene un compromiso de clase, ¿sí?
because here there's a
Y para
commitment
nosotros
to
también es súper
class.
importante, como pueden ver ahí,
And
las
it's
flores
also
en el
very
pelo
important,
y
as you
nuestras
can see,
pañoletas
the
que son de manta,
flowers
que
in
tienen
the
una
hair
consideración
and
metafórica, por
handkerchiefs
eso
over the mouth.
yo no te hablo
And that has a
porque mi boca está tapada,
metaphor.
pero mi boca dice algo porque tiene una imagen, ¿sí?
It's a symbol
Porque hay una
because it
cuestión
says
muy
the mouth is
práctica que
covered
los lienzos nos tapan el traje,
and the cloth,
pero
in
si
a
los
way,
fotógrafos
covers
nos ven
the
la cara, nos ven
overalls,
las
but the
pañoletas, yo les
photographers
regalo
can see
mucha,
us, can see our
mucha
faces,
prensa
can
en nuestro
see the
rostro.
handkerchiefs
Por eso usamos
covering
tanto el
our
rostro
faces, they
y
can
las
see our
pañoletas
faces,
como
and
prensa. De hecho,
that's
vendemos muchas
how
pañoletas
we've
también a lo largo del
come
mundo.
to be known. And we
¿Ok?
sell a lot of
De
these
hecho, en el 8 de
handkerchiefs
marzo vendemos mucho de
throughout the
las
world.
pañoletas.
And
Pero
on
de
March
estos
8th is
rojos que
when we
mandan por carta
sell
vamos a dejar en
most
enero para
of our
venderlos en marzo.
handkerchiefs. We start embroidering them in January to sell
Porque
them in
es una
March.
forma también de desplegar la idea
Because it's a
de
way
lo
of
que la idea
disseminating
o se
the
diga
idea of what you
en una
want
puesta en
to
escena
say, what you want people to
Entonces,
see.
cuando nosotros vamos en la calle, como pueden ver ahí,
So when we
nosotros
go to
en
the
esa
street,
foto,
like you can
eso es
see
lo que
us
se
in
hace,
this
se
photo,
avanza
that's
en
what
la
we do.
marcha en el
We
sentido de
walk
los autos,
along
no sé
with
si
the
es que los
march.
pasajeros, como avanza la gente cuando va marchando,
We walk together
nosotros
with other
se
people.
detiene y nos ponemos en la
And we
orilla,
also
cosa
stop
que la
at a
gente
certain
cuando vaya
point and
pasando se
move to
detenga
the
en las
side
fotos
so that when
y
people
tienen
walk
esas
past
fotos
us,
en
they
las
can
redes
look
sociales.
at
De
us,
esa
or
manera
they
es
can
de
take
que
photos of us, and
nosotros
then they can
distribuimos y
share
nos
those
hemos hecho
photos on
muy
social
populares.
media.
También muy
And that's how
conocidos
we've
y parte de
come
esa
to be
estrategia
known.
es
We've also come to be well
reconocer los
known because part of our
stakeholders que en el
strategy
fondo van a
is to
hacer que se
recognize the
genere un ecosistema de
stakeholders
incidencia.
who will
Para nosotros es
create an
súper
ecosystem of
importante la
advocacy.
alianza que
For
tenemos
us, the
con los
alliances that
fotógrafos
we
de derechos
have
humanos.
with human rights
Es vital, o
photographers
sea,
are
yo no quiero
vital.
pagar
They're
prensa porque si
fundamentally
ellos no
important.
están en la calle, son corresponsales y difunden y divulgan lo que tú haces, ¿sí? Es súper importante tener alianza
The
con las universidades,
alliances
por
and the
eso
solidarity
en
that
estos
we have with
momentos
universities
tenemos
are
gente
also very important. We have a
de
lot of
diferentes
students
de universidades
in different
inglesas y
universities
también
who
muchas universidades en
we
el mundo. Por
collaborate with.
ejemplo, este año
We've
hemos
also
participado en
offered
turismo
classes in
Cambridge, donde
universities
hemos
around the
estado
world. For
colaborando
example,
con
we worked with
investigación,
Rutgers College
colaborando con
in
estudiantes de
Cambridge.
posgrado,
We
de postdoctorado,
collaborate
con
with
las chicas de Brasil, con
PhD
alumnos
and
también de
postdoctoral
Alemania,
programs. We
en los
also
talleres.
collaborate with students from
Eh,
Europe, such as
y
Germany.
es súper importante también el trabajo con otras organizaciones, que no son
And the
el
work that we
O
do
sea,
with
a veces
other
se mezclan, pero en
organizations
realidad
is also
con
very important.
organizaciones feministas, con
We work
organizaciones
with feminist
digitales, con
organizations,
organizaciones
women
universitarias de
organizations,
estudiantes,
university
con organizaciones
organizations.
gremiales,
We work with
que de
academic
alguna manera
organizations
van
and industry
generando
organizations.
como ecosistema en donde
And
la
that way we
creatividad
start
tenga un
creating an
sentido
ecosystem where
que nos
artistic
interesa,
production
el poder apoyar
has
y ayudar
greater
y
meaning.
ser vehículo de las demandas
It's a
de
way
otros y no
of
solamente de las nuestras, que finalmente también son
sharing
representativas.
everyone's demands.
Entonces, eso yo creo que es como ya 3 minutos. Soy súper
I,
respetuosa
I,
del tiempo,
I
perdón,
know we
pero
have
como
three
estudiante profesora
minutes left. I'm a professor, so I'm obsessed with
Entonces,
time. So I'm very
eso es lo que
aware
nosotros
that I only
hacemos.
have 3 minutes left.
Como
So that's what we
que
do.
esta arma de la paz es un arma que
And this
debería
weapon
celebrarse
for
para nosotros
peace
como
is
chilenas, es un
something
honor
that
saber
is
que
an
este lenguaje
honor for
tiene
us
su
to
origen
share.
justamente en
We
Chile
know that this language
y que se ha propagado en tantos otros lugares. Y
comes from
eso,
Chile and has been shared
digamos que
throughout the
incluso en
world.
Chile no es tan
And
reconocido. ¿Por qué?
even
Porque
in
somos
Chile, it's not
mujeres,
so
pero es un
recognized.
lenguaje
Why?
más joven.
Because we're women. If it was a language of male
Es
artists,
mucho más
then
evidente.
it
Bueno,
would
porque además
be
somos
much more
mujeres de
visible,
izquierda, entonces
especially because we're women and we're women from the left.
ojalá no metiéramos tanto ruido, ojalá no dijéramos
And
tantas
people
verdades
say
y
that they
ojalá
hope we
fueran
didn't
tan
make so
bonitas.
much noise, we didn't
Como eso,
say the truth
porque
so
también es
often,
bien
and that we
trata
weren't so
de
beautiful because
poder
there's this logic
generar una
of
pieza que se pueda ver en el espacio
creating
público, que
a
también son
piece
técnicas
that
especiales,
can
para que el
occupy
esfuerzo
public
de la
space.
puntada valga la pena y que no pase como desapercibido, digamos. Entonces todo eso lo vamos probando con
That's
la cámara,
something
vemos cómo
that
se ve
we're
de frente, a qué hora va a salir la pieza, cuándo se va a exponer,
try in
qué día
different
sí, qué día
ways. For
mañana,
example, if
son
it's in the
diferentes cosas que
morning
hacemos
or
técnicamente
during
que
the
que nos
afternoon, and
salieron
we
la
take
primera vez que lo vimos en la
photos
calle.
and we create pieces and we
Así que
experiment every
eso,
time we take it out onto the
eh,
street for the
si
first
alguien tiene
time.
alguna duda,
If you have any
la puede
questions or
hacer
any
vía el chat
comments,
y la podemos compartir
please let us
en
know
el
through the
momento.
chat and we will respond to your questions at the end of the session.
Uy, qué linda esa foto, no me acuerdo. Está bonita.
That's a really beautiful photo. Hadn't remembered that.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation. We will now move on to Tamara, and then, like you said, we will leave questions until the end. We'll give you some time to ask any questions you might have later.
Hola, quiero agradecer a toda la gente que está acá.
I would like to thank everyone
Gracias por la
that is
invitación a
joining
este
us tonight. Thank
conversatorio,
you for the
especialmente a
invitation to
Natalia,
participate in this conversation.
que hemos
Thank you,
estado hace
Natalia.
3 años planificando todo
We've been
esto,
planning
todas
all
estas
of this for
actividades,
3 years now,
así que
planning
agradezco
and
su
organizing
confianza,
activities. Thank you,
también
Natalia, for your
el
trust.
haber creído en mi trabajo,
Thank you for believing in my work
todo.
and for
Les quiero
everything.
contar sobre mí, sobre mi investigación,
I would like to
del
tell
distrito
you
americano.
about me,
Y
about my work,
específicamente sobre la arpillera, la
and
dictadura,
specifically about
y también les voy a
arpilleras,
contar
the
sobre mi obra
textiles,
que se llama Agua Dulce Libre.
dictatorship, and I'll tell you
Yo
specifically
soy
about my
licenciada en
piece,
Bellas
Agua Dulce
Artes de
Libre.
Chile,
I have a degree in
realicé
fine
un
arts in
posgrado
Chile
en
and a
lenguaje de los pueblos
postgraduate
contados en
degree in
Argentina,
combined artistic language
y siempre me
in
interesaron las
Argentina. I've
manifestaciones
always been
artísticas no
interested in
tradicionales. En
non-traditional
mi
artistic
adolescencia me
expression.
gustaba hacer grafitis,
When I was a teenager, I
hice
did
tatuajes,
graffiti, I
estudié
did
cine en una
tattoos, I
escuela
studied
popular de cine social,
film
en
in a
donde creábamos
popular film
documentales en los
school where we
espacios
created documentaries
marginados de la
in
sociedad y después
marginalized
íbamos
spaces in
a
society.
reproducir los documentales que habíamos hecho
And
de esos
then
mismos lugares.
we would share those
Desde niña
documentaries in those
supe costura,
communities. Since I was a
porque mi
child,
mamá
I knew how to
era
sew
costurera y
because my mother was a
reciclábamos ropa
seamstress and we
usada.
recycled American
Ustedes se
clothes.
preguntarán, ¿qué es la
You
ropa
might be
americana?
asking, what do you
Lo que
mean
pasa
by
es que
American
en
clothes?
Chile
What happens is that
existe un
in
comercio
Chile,
textil de bajo
there's
costo
low
en donde se
cost
vende
textile
ropa
trade
y sucio
where
de países del primer mundo.
clothes from the first
Seguramente eso
world
no
that haven't been
existe en
used
Canadá.
are sold.
Entonces
I'm
siempre
sure that
estuve
that doesn't
interesada
exist
por
in
esas
Canada. I was always
manifestaciones
interested
artísticas
in
alternativas
those
al tema de las
alternative
bellas artes,
artistic expressions in terms of
que eran
fine
marginadas o también que eran llamadas arte
that
popular,
were
como
marginalized
se
or
nombra
referred to
ahora a
as
las artistas
popular
también.
art.
O sea, no están en el mundo de las bellas artes, sino que son arte
Artilleras,
popular.
for example, are called part of
Cuando
popular
conocí la
art or
historia
folk art because they're
de la
not part of
dictadura,
fine art.
me sorprendió mucho porque no
When I
podía
learned about the
creer
history
que
of
no había
the
escuchado
textile
nunca
artists or
hablar de ellos a
arpilleristas during
pesar
the
de todos mis años
dictatorship,
de
I was
estudios.
surprised because I'd never heard
Para
about
mí era
them
como un
or learned
tesoro que
about them
debía
despite
ser
all of my
compartido con
years
todo el
of
mundo.
studies. For me, it was a
Este
treasure that
encuentro
should be
fue
shared
en el
with
año
everyone.
2012
This happened in
y en
2012, and
2017,
then in
estando en
2017,
Argentina,
when I was in
creé Trenza
Argentina,
Textil,
I created a
que es una escuela
called
virtual de bordado
Trenza Textil,
latinoamericano
a
y
textile
cosmovisión de los
braid,
pueblos originarios.
and it
En
takes into
Trenza
account
Textil, la palabra
indigenous
trenza
worldviews.
no significa
trenza doesn't only refer to a braid, like a braid for your hair, but it also has to do with union, with weaving and braiding, bringing together women from different parts of the world. It's a virtual school, so it allows us to bring together women from all over the world. And the goal is to connect with women from different times. According to women of the pre-Columbian cultures, when you weave a textile, you're creating a living being. To know how to weave and to be able to give life is an innate part of being a woman. It's like weaving the fabric of a human being in the uterus and womb. That's why we're all weavers. This project doesn't only focus on the technique. It's much deeper than that. Now I'm going to share with you some images. Natalia, I hope that you can help me share my presentation. Chilean arpilleras, which is burlap cloth, was the door that opened the world to Latin American textiles for me. When I learned about its history, I realized that many of its characteristics also appeared in the work of, for example, communities, women's work, and materials linked to the territory. But they were also part of textile practices in countries like Peru or in Mexico. These textiles speak of cities, of industrialization. We'll move to the next image, please. Here we can see women weaving in Peru, and we can see some of the same concepts, always working in community with materials connected to the territory. And in the case of indigenous communities, a textile is always connected to nature because the fibers are extracted from plants, like wool or cotton, then they're dyed with plants from the region, and then the textile is woven. So the entire process is closely linked to the land and to the territory. When a woman makes a textile, you can see, or when she's made a textile, she knows where it comes from. Arpilleras also have synthetic materials, and they speak to us of the city, of a different kind of context. I think it's fundamental to recognize these elements, which can help us better understand our current living conditions. In the case of arpilleras, the benefits have been very important for women in terms of reparation of trauma. They were able to talk about what they were living. The torture and the human rights violations that they were suffering were not made invisible. They were able to speak and have a voice in the midst of censorship, where borders were closed, when journalists weren't allowed to enter the country. And today, for example, there are few spaces for women where they can speak freely. I'm surprised when in my arpillera class, I tell the students that they have to look for a personal story that is relevant for them to share. And many of them don't know what to choose because they've never had the time or the space to reflect about their own lives. That moves me and touches me deeply. We'll go to the next photo. Another element which is less explicit in the arpilleras from the dictatorship is the feminist component. Although they never labeled themselves as feminists, now looking back, we can see that the resistance movements in the 70s, most of them were men in manifestations, in books, in photography. Marxism had a patriarchal component of having a hierarchical structure.
siguiente, por favor. Las mujeres
And women
luchaban mayormente en el campo de lo
women were
doméstico,
resisting
de lo territorial,
and
de la
fighting
familia, del hogar.
in issues that were related
Ellas
to
eran
the
quienes
home,
estaban buscando
family, and
familiares
land.
con fotos,
They were the ones who were looking for
preocupadas de que
family
los niños
members with
tuvieran que
photos.
comer,
They
como
were the
vemos
ones
acá
who were
en esta
concerned about
arpillera,
whether their children would have enough to
estaban
eat. Like we
incluso
can see
sosteniendo
in this
psicológicamente a
textile,
otras mujeres.
they were supporting
Y
other
también
women's mental health.
defendiendo los recursos naturales como
And they
el
were
agua,
also defending
que es
natural
el tema que
resources
inspiró
such as
mi obra
water,
Agua Dulce Libre.
which is what inspired my
Seguimos, por favor.
piece, Agua Dulce Libre,
Como vemos acá,
free
están las
sweet water.
mujeres representadas aquí
Here you
en
can see
manifestaciones,
women that are
en la
represented
calle,
in
encadenadas, ¿cierto?
a
Se
protest.
encadenaban a instituciones para que las
They
tomaran
would
en cuenta.
chain themselves
La
to
siguiente.
institutions.
Las vemos acá nuevamente en la calle,
Here we can
organizándose
see
en sus
women in the
comunidades
street
para prestar
organizing
servicios a
themselves
otras mujeres, para
and providing
cocinar,
services
para
to other
lavar.
women, organizing
Seguimos.
cooking, cleaning.
Y acá vemos una arpillera que está denunciando la escasez de agua.
This is an arpillera that
Y
speaks
me
about the
pareció
lack
muy
of
interesante
water.
porque esta característica también de la lucha femenina en la dictadura solo
The
quedaba
feminist struggle in the
registrada en las
context of
arpilleras.
dictatorship was
Nosotros
only
vemos las
registered or
arpilleras y vemos
recorded
que
in
mayormente
arpilleras.
son
In the
mujeres las que están
arpilleras,
representadas
we
acá.
can see
O
that
sea,
it's mainly
ellas se
women that are
representaban
being
a ellas
represented.
mismas
So the
en la
women were
lucha,
representing
¿cierto?
themselves as
Entonces
part
eso
of
me
the
parece muy
struggle.
interesante
And I
porque
think that's very
no hay
interesting.
fotografías o no hay otro
There
tipo de
aren't
registro
photos or
de
other kinds of
mujeres
records
en esa
or
época.
documentation of women during that time.
Continuamos. Bueno, en cuanto a lo técnico, la arpillera técnicamente
Technically,
podría definirse
arpilleras could
como
be
una
defined
narración textil
as a textile
compuesta
narrative
por retazos de tela,
composed of scraps of
un
fabric,
collage
a
textil
textile
o
collage, or
patchwork.
patchwork.
Pero es mucho más que eso.
But it's much more than that.
Si analizamos la arpillera desde un punto de
If we
vista
look at arpilleras
estético
from an aesthetic point of view,
semiótico,
from a
podemos ver
semiotic
cómo
point of view, we
cuenta
can
por
see that
distintos
it has
significantes y
different meanings,
significados.
signifiers,
Por ejemplo, seguimos.
and significations. For
La tela de
example,
base que se usa en la arpillera,
the main
la
fabric that
técnica
is
arpillera
used
tiene su nombre
is
por esta
burlap.
tela, que es la base, es el jute. Y
For
también se
example,
utiliza la grea,
jute.
que es el lienzo de algodón.
And agrea can also be
Ambas
used, which is a
telas son
cotton
recicladas de
canvas.
los sacos de papa
Both
y los sacos
fabrics
de
are
arroz.
recycled from potato
Son
sacks and
bolsas
flour sacks.
contenedoras de alimentos
These are
que
bags
pasan a
that contain
transformarse
food that
en
become
contenedoras de
containers of
historias y
stories
emociones.
and emotions.
Los retazos de tela que se
The
utilizan
fabric
también
scraps
fueron
used
llamados telas de desecho,
were also called
porque al no tener dinero para comprar materiales,
fabric that could be thrown
utilizaban
away,
telas
because
de ropa vieja, de
when
ropa de
people didn't
segunda
have
mano,
money to buy cloth, they
incluso
would
ropa de sus
use
familiares
secondhand
desaparecidos
clothing.
como un símbolo de que estaban
And
presentes
it
en la
was a
representación
symbol
textil.
when they used, for
No se
example,
utilizaron puntos
cloth that
tradicionales
belonged
de
to
bordado
family members of their presence in
y
the struggle.
materiales tradicionales de bordado. Las puntadas de bordado utilizadas no solo eran
The
de
embroidery
costura,
points
no
were
solo
not
eran para pegar los
just
retazos
the
de tela
classic points
a
that
la
are
arpillera,
used to bring
sino
the
que son
cloth
puntadas
and the
visibles,
arpillera together, but
como
they
si se
use
tratara de
points
una
and
herida
stitches that are
que se está
visible as if it
cosiendo
were a
y que va a
wound
dejar una
that is
cicatriz.
being sewn and that will leave a
Incluso los
scar.
dibujos nos hablan de que su propósito no
The
es crear
images
algo bello, no
show us that the
tiene
purpose is not to create
sino que su
something
importancia es
beautiful.
lo que se está
It's not an
contando.
aesthetic goal. The importance
Seguimos.
is the story that is being told.
Las primeras arpilleras son muy impactantes.
These
Los distintos
arpilleras
retazos que por separado no
are very
significaban nada,
impactful.
ahora se unen para comunicar una idea,
They
como
communicate
si
an
todas las
idea
emociones dispersas de un suceso
as if
dramático
all of the
tomaran
emotions that are
forma
a
y se
result of a
pudieran
dramatic
reconocer por
event
fin.
begin to take
Esta
shape
es
and
una
become
de
recognizable.
las primeras
This is one of the
arpilleras que
first
se hizo.
arpilleras that
Eso
was
se puede ver
created.
porque los bordes tienen un
And you can
tejido
tell it's one of the
a
first
ganchillo o a ganchillo.
arpilleras
Se pueden
because there's a
identificar de esa forma.
crochet stitch
Se
along
llama
the
la
border,
garra. Ustedes se
and it's
fijan
called
acá,
the
esta
claw.
garra negra es la garra de la tortura. Porque
And this claw
están
represents
representadas
torture.
personas ahí que se están
It's
torturando.
representing people who are being tortured.
Seguimos. El textil produce un lenguaje simbólico.
The textile
Cuando
creates a
nombramos los
symbolic
conceptos
language.
de
When we
unir,
name
reparar,
concepts such as
coser,
reparation,
no
union,
solo nos referimos a la
sewing,
tela,
we not only
sino
are
también
referring to the
a lo
cloth,
personal,
we're
lo
also
social y
referring
lo
to the
político.
personal,
Se
social,
genera
and
una
political
dialéctica
sphere. There's a
entre lo
dialectic
interno y lo externo,
between the internal
entre la
and
arpillera y la
external,
mujer.
between the arpillera and the woman.
El textil, los tejidos,
The
los
textile,
bordados, siempre
the
en
embroidery,
tiempos ancestrales
since
han sido la
ancestral
escritura de las
times,
mujeres.
has been women's
La
way of
escritura con
writing.
palabras se introdujo en la colonización.
Writing through
Según
words was
Occidente,
introduced with
la historia
colonialism.
comienza cuando empieza la
According to the
escritura
West,
y
this
todo lo
history
anterior es
begins
prehistoria.
when writing begins, and everything
Pero
before that is
durante
considered
miles de años las
prehistory.
mujeres
But
escribieron con
during
el
thousands
lenguaje
of years,
iconográfico, con
women
lenguaje
wrote through
de
images,
imágenes, y se comunicaron a través de la oralidad y los
and they
dialectos. Por eso no es
communicated
extraño
through
que el
oral
lenguaje textil
stories
haya
and
sido
chants and
escogido por las
songs.
mujeres
That's
para
why it's not
comunicar
a
sus
surprise
dolores
that
y
arpilleras
que este
were
sello se
chosen by
expandió
women to
todo el mundo.
communicate their pain, and
Porque
that
a medida que
this
fueron pasando
was
los años,
has expanded
se
throughout the
empezó a hacer
world because
arpillera en distintos países, ¿verdad?
throughout the years,
Para
arpilleras started to be
comunicar distintas
created
problemáticas
in
como
different
el
countries
femicidio,
to communicate
como
different issues such as femicide,
también la lucha por los recursos
the
naturales,
fight
la escasez de
for
agua, la
natural
contaminación.
resources, the lack of water or
Seguimos.
pollution.
Analizar la historia me permitió saber
By
cómo se fue
analyzing the
formando
history,
esta estética
I
de la
came to
arpillera
understand how
que
the
narra
arpillera's
sucesos muy
aesthetic
terribles
came to be,
de una
which
forma muy
narrates
inocente,
terrible events in a very
hasta a veces
innocent
tierna.
way. It can even
Eso es
be
lo que más
tender.
impacta al espectador.
That's what
Este
impacts the viewer the
contraste entre
most, the
forma y
contrast
contenido.
between form and
Muchas veces
content.
cuando se ve una arpillera de
Often,
lejos,
when
la
you look
gente
at an
piensa que se
arpillera
está representando
from a
algo lindo.
distance, people
Pero
think
cuando
that
se acercan a
something
verlo y se dan cuenta
sweet
que
or
es una
tender
escena
is
de
being represented, but
violación a
when
los
they get
derechos
closer,
humanos,
they see that it's a
ese
scene of human
contraste es
rights
lo que más
violations.
impacta.
That contrast is what
Fui
has a
analizando los
strong
elementos
impact.
artísticos
I
como el
analyzed
uso de la
the artistic
perspectiva,
elements, such as the
los
use of
planos.
perspective,
Generalmente la arpillera tiene un plano de fondo y un plano de frente.
depths, planes.
También los
There's
colores
usually
que
a
se
frontal
utilizaban, los
plane
tipos de
and
portada, y
a
a
deeper
partir de
plane,
eso fui
colors, types of stitches,
formando esta
embroidery.
obra.
And that's how I
Seguimos.
started to better
Mi
understand
obra Agua
the work.
Dulce Libre
And
es una
my
arpillera.
piece,
Mide
Agua
1
Dulce
metro de
Libre, is an
alto
arpillera.
por 1
It's
metro
1
60 de
meter
ancho. Y
tall
está
and
hecha sobre una base de crea,
1.60 meters
que es
wide.
el lienzo de algodón de los sacos de harina.
And it's
Y fue realizada entre
a cotton
2019
canvas
y
from a
2020
flour
entre
bag.
Chile y Argentina. Con
And
telas
I created it
completamente
between
recicladas.
Argentina and Chile
Algunas
between
mías,
2019
otras obtenidas de los restos de
2020
tela de
with
fábricas
completely
de ropa
recycled fabrics, for
y otras
example,
que me
from
regalaron por Facebook.
clothing factories or
Hice
clothes
una
that
petición
I
por Facebook en
was
Argentina,
gifted through
que me
Facebook.
podían
I
donar retazos de
put
tela
up a
y ahí
post
me
on
regalaron
Facebook in
cientos de
Argentina to see who could gift me
Seguimos.
some cloth and fabric, and many people gave me
Fue realizada para
cloths.
una exposición en Santiago,
I prepared it for
donde
an
Natalia la
exhibit in
conoció.
Santiago
Se
where Natalia
llamaba
saw it.
Arpilleras, Mujeres, Memoria y Resistencia,
It was called
donde también
Arpilleras,
participó
Mujeres y
Bélgica Castro.
Resistencia.
La
Bélgica
colección de
Castro
arpilleras del Museo de la
participated.
Memoria y los Derechos Humanos
The
y las arpilleristas de
Arpilleras, the
Huacaca,
Museum of
un
Memory and
colectivo de
Human Rights,
arpilleristas de la
that
dictadura.
collected arpilleristas
La curatoría de esta exposición,
from Oaxaca
realizada
from the
por Pablo
dictatorship.
Vergara, proponía
The
juntar
exhibit by Pablo
diferentes
Vergara
generaciones de
brought together
arpilleristas
different
y yo era la más
generations of
joven.
textile artists, and I was
Entonces
the
quise hacer
youngest
una
of them.
diferencia a nivel compositivo con las
That's why I
generaciones
wanted
anteriores,
my composition
principalmente en el
to
uso de la perspectiva y
be
el
different
tamaño
than
total de
previous
la obra,
generations,
pero
specifically in terms
respetando
of
los
the
principios
perspective
básicos
and
de
the
la
size,
técnica
while
y su
also
contenido de denuncia.
keeping the basic principles of the
El
technique
tema de
and the
la obra
theme of
está
resistance.
representando un enfrentamiento
The piece
entre
represents a
la ciudad y el
confrontation
campo.
between the city
Estas
and the
dos
countryside or the nature.
secciones dividen
These
la
two
imagen en la
sections
mitad.
divide the
Una
image
que
in
está en
half.
sombras
One is
y
in
otra que
shadows
está en colores,
and the other one
donde
is in
el agua
color,
del río
where
se
the water
enfrenta al
from
agua
the
del fuero
river
policial. Y
meets
en el centro de la
water
escena
from the
se
police
une
tank.
por personas
And
que
in
se
the middle
estaban
of the
enfrentando
scene, we
en
see
defensa del
people
río.
who are protesting
Yo me imaginé
to defend the
el
river.
sentimiento del agua
I
al verse
imagined the river and the
tirada
water's
a ella
feeling
misma en el carro policial.
when it is
Lo
being
digo en palabras y
confronted by the
me
police
pongo
tank.
triste.
And it still to this day makes me feel
Esta
sad
agua
when
del
I
río
speak
se
about it.
enfrenta
The water
a
from
la
the
misma
river
agua del carro policial, pero
meets
que
the
es un agua
water that the
intoxicada de
police are
químicos
spraying, which is
para
water
dañar a los
that is
manifestantes.
polluted with toxic chemicals to
La
harm the
represión
protesters.
se vale del mismo elemento para generar violencia.
So the
Reprimen la
same
defensa del
element is
agua
being
con
used
agua.
for violence.
La paradoja.
They are
También
repressing access to
reflexionaba
water
sobre que el
with
poder del
water
río es
itself.
inmenso
The paradox there.
comparado al del ser humano. No se compara ni en fuerza ni en tamaño.
The
Por eso
strength
quise
and
darle
size
mucha más
can't be
presencia al
compared.
río,
That's why I wanted
que
to
si
give a greater
quisiera
focus to the
podría
river,
arrasar
because
con
if it
toda la
wanted to,
maquinaria
it could
estatal.
sweep
Hilos.
away so much in its path.
Para esta idea, trabajé el río con un relleno para darle relieve e
I
importancia.
chose to make the river
Todas las
stand
figuras
out,
del campo
to give it more
están
importance.
mucho
And
más
all the
trabajadas,
figures in the field
son más
are much more
orgánicas,
detailed.
tienen
I've
más
worked on them
movimiento,
much more. They're
distintas
organic,
texturas,
they have
y el
movement,
paisaje
different
en general
textures,
de
and the
esta zona
landscape in
tiene
general
mucha
in
más
this
vida,
section
en la que
has much more
participan
life.
personas y animales
Both
en
people
torno
and
al que llamó
animals are
Federico el
present,
territorio.
and they're
En
surrounding
la
the
ciudad
source
de
of
Italia
life
es más
in
plano.
their area,
Seguimos.
whereas the section that
Esta obra
represents the
fue
city is
creada
much
durante el
more flat.
estallido social de octubre
This
de
piece
2020,
was
donde surgieron
created
muchas
in
demandas
October
por la sequía
2020
y
during
la
the social
falta de
uprising.
agua en
There
sus
were a lot of
coberturas.
demands
Se
due to the
veían
drought.
fotografías de animales muertos,
There were
plantaciones
photos of
secas,
animals that had
ríos
died,
secos,
plantations that were
personas que no
dried,
tenían agua potable
rivers that
en
had
sus
dried
casas.
out, and communities that didn't have
Seguimos.
access to water in their
En
homes.
las manifestaciones se popularizó la frase no es
And
sequía,
in the
es
protests,
saqueo.
there was a phrase that was commonly
Porque
said, it's not a drought,
en
it's
redes
plunder.
sociales aparecieron
Because in social networks,
videos
in social
de
media,
ríos
we
secos.
saw videos of
Estaba la gente
dry
grabándose
riverbeds.
y
People
de
would
un momento
be
a otro el caudal del
filming,
río volvía.
and then from
Entonces
one
ahí la
moment to
gente
the
se dio cuenta
next,
que el río
the
no
river
estaba
flow
seco por
would
causas
return.
naturales, sino que
And people
alguien lo
realized
tenía
that the river hadn't dried due
alguien no
to
dejaba que el caudal
natural
del
reasons.
río
What happened was that
siguiera.
someone was cutting off
Entonces,
the
de
river
ahí esta
flow
frase no
and
es
then letting it
sequía, es
start
saqueo.
again. That's where
Y la
this
frase central de la
came from.
película
It's not
dice,
drought, it's
matan a la
plunder.
gente para quedarse con el río
And the
y
main
luego
phrase in
matan
the
al
piece
río.
is they kill people to
Esta
control the
frase
river
es
and then
de
they kill the
Germán Ávila,
river. This
un
is from
defensor
Hermana
ambiental
Avila,
colombiano.
a Colombian
Esta
environmental
situación ha ido
defender.
empeorando al pasar los
The
años,
situation has been
principalmente
worsening
por el
during the
nivel de
past years,
explotación y
specifically
extractivismo
in terms
de
of
las
the
industrias
exploitation
forestales,
and
mineras,
extractivism
y en el caso
due
de países
to
vecinos, por
mining,
la agroindustria
forestry,
y los agrotóxicos en los campos de soya,
and toxic
que han creado
agricultural
lo que se
chemicals
denomina
used in
zonas de
soy
sacrificio,
plantations.
territorios devastados por las industrias.
These
Estos
territories have been
ecosistemas obligan a
destroyed by
comunidades a abandonar
industries
sus
and
territorios
they force
y en
communities to
sequía
leave
sufren
their
enfermedades
territories
respiratorias, enfermedades a la piel,
and they leave in their
tumores y
wake
cáncer.
respiratory illness, tumors, cancer.
Uno de los casos recientes más conocidos
One of the most recent
fue
cases and one of
el
the most
proyecto
well-known
minero de Pascua Lama,
cases was the
de
Pascualama
una
mining
minera
project
canadiense
by Barrick
que
Gold,
operaba
a
desde
Canadian
Toronto,
mining company
que
based
explotó
or
una mina a
headquartered in
cielo
Toronto,
abierto
which
entre
created an
Chile y
open
Argentina
pit mine
en
between
plena
Chile and
cordillera de los
Argentina
Andes, a la
in
altura de Atacama
the
y San Juan,
Andes
que
mountain
destruyó
range,
glaciares y
Costa
arreciera
Atacama
de
and
los
San
ríos
Juan. It
y
destroyed
que era parte del
glaciers,
territorio
interrupted rivers,
ancestral de la
and it
comunidad
was part
indígena
of the
Villamitra de
traditional
Guanajuato.
territories of the
Muchos de estos
indigenous
lugares son
communities.
lugares sagrados para las comunidades
Many of
indígenas.
these places are
El
sacred for the
proyecto
local
afectó la
indigenous
vida de
communities.
75.000 personas.
It affected the
Deterioró los
lives of
cultivos rurales básicos por
75,000
la
people.
contaminación
It
del agua,
deteriorated
redujo los
the
afluentes en más de
agricultural
un 90%
fields, it polluted water sources, and destroyed ecosystems. This project was approved by Eduardo Fe and Carlos Mena, presidents of Chile and Argentina in 1997, and it was called Integration and Mining Integration. As a result of the legal actions taken by the community, my project speaks to the defense of rivers, lakes, and the environment. Fresh water is everything that's not salt water. My piece celebrates solidarity amongst people in different territories, in cities and in fields. It also speaks about protecting forests and animals. And the piece is also an invitation to re-understand that people are part of this weave. Nature is not a resource to be consumed. And to conclude, I wanted to share with you that I created this textile in Argentina, and I had to bring it to Chile to be part of the exhibition during the time when the social uprising was the closest thing to a dictatorship. And at that time was when I admired most the ability of women to create these testimonies during the dictatorship in a context of so much fear and death. I felt at times that I wouldn't be strong enough to see how the story was being repeated, military in the streets, curfews, deaths, people who lost their sight. When I was traveling back to Chile and I went through customs, I remembered the stories of the Villeras who were clandestinely left, and I felt terror when I thought that they might look to my luggage and find this piece of what they would have called propaganda. But luckily, textiles have never been reason to suspect, so they can travel well. Currently, after 2 years, after making this arpillera 2 years ago, I started living on the left side of my arpillera. I could now be one of the women, for example, who are bending down and gathering water from the river. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, Natalia.
Thank you both so much for your presentation. It's really nice to reflect on these pieces in such great detail. So I thank you both for taking the time to talk us through the pieces individually and to contextualize them within this rich history. And now we can move on to questions. You can either put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask the questions that you may have. Yeah, we'll just give you a second to formulate those and we'll go from there. I see that some are coming in through the chat. Should we approach them one by one?
So do you want me to read them just to facilitate access to them? Okay, so I see, and thank you Tamara and Erika for very, powerful presentations and sharing so much of the process. It's very special. It's coming like full circle, so it's very, very special to me. And thank you to everyone that has sticked around with us. I have Camila expressed her excitement about the, as a Chilean in Canada. And Cici Wyman, I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, asks to Erika, how did COVID time affect the Artillera expression?
Hola Camila, saludos desde tu Chile.
Hi, Camila. Greetings from your Chile.
Bueno, yo creo que en esas paradojas de las vidas paralelas, nosotros
in the context of paradox, parallel lives, we've had more workshops online, and we were able to raise more funds during the pandemic because we have 120 students throughout the world, and some of our students are here today with us. I can see them. I can see Claudia from Australia, who is also organizing an activity in her region, and there are a lot of stories that connect us with her family. We worked with memory, and we were embroidering a dove that represents her mom after her mom had passed, and I actually wrote a story which will soon be published. Our lives had parallel dimensions. There was the dimension of suffering and pain, but fortunately, there was Zoom during the pandemic and social media, and that made it possible for us to continue teaching and sharing with the same idea of embroidering together. And people would pay for a course, but what they were really paying for, because we work with pieces that are very simple, but it was an opportunity for them to share their experiences and what was happening to them. And that was a ritual where we were all present. We were coming together from different parts of the world. And that way, we were accompanying each other. It was another way of being together in a different way, not necessarily at a table cooking, stitching, but through a virtual medium. And not everyone during the dictatorship was embroidering with a political goal in mind, but they were doing it to survive. And the money that we were making through our work was also important for us to survive, to be able to buy food. And there were people who would take the same workshop, the same class 3 times. And what we realized, it wasn't necessarily the skills that they were after, but it was that opportunity to share their experiences and to connect with others.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess for the question of the courses online, so we have the social media for all of the artists in the Suri Gallery page, and I invite you to revise. I'm sure you can contact Erika, and she can share a little bit more about that with you. We have another question from Cici to Tamara. So do you have any new pieces that you want to work with when it comes to Artilleras?
Actualmente estoy trabajando en un proyecto financiado por el Ministerio.
Yes, I'm currently working on a piece with financing from the Ministry of Culture, and it's
Nuestra
called
carrera
Bordar lo
se
Invisible or
tiene más que
Embroidering
ver
the
con el
Invisible.
trabajo de
And it has
investigación
more to do with
de los
my
rituales
research work
de los pueblos
with regards
originarios
to
relacionados al
rituals,
bordado
indigenous
y al
people's
textil.
rituals, and the connection
Estoy
to
trabajando con una
embroidery
amiga,
and textile.
Amaranta
I'm
Espinosa,
collaborating with
y estamos
Amaranta
trabajando a
Espinosa, a
distancia.
friend of mine, and we're working
Entonces,
together
eh,
remotely.
es un proyecto que explora el mundo de lo
It's a
invisible.
project that
Por
explores the
ejemplo,
invisible realm.
hay
For
distintos
example,
pueblos en América
there are
Latina
different
que
communities in
su
Latin
práctica
America
textil está
where their
vinculada a las
textile
plantas de
practice
poder,
is connected to
como la ayahuasca, el
powers such as
peyote, en
ayahuasca,
donde se
peyote,
accede a otras
where they
dimensiones
can
de
access
existencia, pero
other
que podemos
dimensions
ver
of
en la
existence
conciencia
that
del
can
día a día.
be seen with the
Entonces,
consciousness that we have in our
nos
day to
estamos
day.
inspirando
So we're
en esas experiencias para nosotras
gathering
crear ciertos
inspiration from
rituales
those
y poder
experiences so that
conectar
we
con
can create our own
ese mundo de lo
rituals
invisible
and
y
connect with
bordar.
that realm of the
Estamos
invisible and
bordando
embroider that.
dos
We're
pallets
embroidering
de gran formato, miden 3
two
metros,
large scale
tienen forma de
pieces,
montaña.
3 meters.
Como les
They have
decía
the
en la
shape of a
presentación
mountain.
también,
As I was
las
saying during the
montañas son
presentation, the
lugares
mountains
sagrados para los
are a
pueblos
sacred
de
place
nuestros territorios
for
y
indigenous
estoy trabajando en
communities
eso ahora.
in
Es
our
una
region.
exposición
So that's
que va a
one piece that
estar
I'm working on.
en
It's an
Santiago
exhibit that will
en
be
octubre,
shown in Santiago in October,
septiembre, octubre,
either September or October.
para quienes estén en Chile
For those of you in Chile,
invitadas.
you are warmly invited.
Sorry, I'm just still, thank you so much. Filling up. Lots of messages of thank you for sharing your work. And so Abigail asks to both of you, what struggles did you go through and what made all your hard work worth it?
Yo creo que hay una... Yo creo que uno de los retos más importantes en Chile es no perder
I
la
think
esperanza,
one of the
sobre todo
biggest
después
challenges in Chile is to not lose hope,
de la derrota de la nueva
especially
constitución que fue la primera
after
constitución
the
feminista.
failure of the last
Entonces,
constitution,
eso
which
es lo
was
bueno de
supposed to be
saber
the
la
first
historia.
feminist constitution.
Y eso es lo bueno
So it's
también
good to
de
know
mi tesis de
about
la vida paralela.
history.
La
And
resistencia
what's connected to my
también es
idea
una
about
forma
parallel
de
lives.
no abatirse,
Resistance
¿sí?
is a way of not giving up,
Porque obviamente que quienes quieren mantener el sistema
because
son
those
bien
who want
derrotados.
to
Por lo tanto, ser
continue
testigo de
having
esa
control of
derrota
the system
y
want
hacerlo
to
conocer
see us
también.
give
Entonces,
up.
para mí esto no tiene ningún sentido que yo borde sola, no,
For me, there's no
no
meaning
da
in
ningún satisfacción.
embroidering
La
alone. It doesn't
satisfacción que
give
me da
me
es
any
entregar, sobre todo a
gratification.
quienes enfrentan momentos que son súper dolorosos en términos políticos,
For me,
de
it's important
derrota,
to work
tremendas
with
derrotas,
people who are working in very painful
tan
moments,
significativas que
political
tenían tanta esperanza en su
confrontation,
resistencia, sobre
moments where
todo
there
cuando
was so
uno
much
dejó la vida en la
hope,
calle, porque una
especially
cosa
when
es uno
people were
defenderse
risking their
y
lives in the
como
streets,
estuvo Natalia, cuando
just
veía
like
que las cosas
Natalie
pasaban del
was.
lado, no es que uno escuchara o le contaran, sino que estaba
It's
ahí
not the
realmente
same as
viendo un
hearing
proyecto
about
de
something
Chile
or
nuevo, ¿verdad?
watching something. She was there, she
Eso
was listening, she was
para mí en términos
participating.
personales no fue difícil.
For
Yo
me, at a personal
viví
level,
las
that was
grandes pruebas
not
de mi vida.
difficult.
Entonces eso
I've
hace que uno
suffered great failures in my life,
tenga una
and
reflexión que es muy simple. Yo,
that
sin embargo,
has
no me
given
voy
me
a ir a mi
perspective.
casa a ver televisión, no me
I'm
voy a ir
not
a
going
mi
to
casa
go
a volver a
home
crear
to
sola,
watch
no me
TV. I'm
interesa.
not
Por lo
going
tanto,
to
no sé hacer otra
embroider
cosa.
on
Lo
my
que yo sé
own.
hacer
I
es
don't know what
revisar
else
los
to do.
proyectos
This
con
is
las
the only
personas que
thing I
puedan seguir
know
en eso
to do, which is to be with other
hermanos que puedan
people and
quienes
to
no han tenido la
resist
suerte
together
de
and to be out on the
sufrir
street
tantas derrotas como yo,
and
que a uno
to
le
fight
duele.
for people who haven't had
Entonces, yo creo que eso
fortune, so
genera
to
sentido. Bueno,
speak,
y una de las
of
cosas que genera
suffering
sentido es
so
justamente
much as I have.
recuperar esa memoria a partir de una exposición que estamos haciendo que se llama
We're working on an
Hilos de
exhibit,
Resiliencia,
which
que
is
ya vamos a ir
called Threads of
a llevar
Resistance, 50
a
years,
Francia, a Bruselas, a
which will
Berlín,
be
a
exhibited in
Pompeya, donde
Brussels,
van a ver
France,
50
Berlin,
bordadoras del
Pompeii.
mundo.
There will
Todavía
be
seguimos
50
abriendo la posibilidad de
textile
participar en el
artists from
interior.
around the world.
Tenemos
There's still
posibilidad de seguir trabajando con la
opportunities
Organización de
for
Estados
people to
Unidos,
join.
con
So
la
if you would
Comunidad de
like
Hilos
to
Americanos
participate, please
y junto con
contact us.
colaboradores,
There are people who are working
con
who have
diferentes
had
organizaciones
their
de mujeres,
children have been
protectores
disappeared, who are
patrimoniales,
victims of
defensores de los
violence.
humanos vivos, haciendo
It's a mix of 25 pieces from the period of dictatorship and 25 pieces during the time of democracy. The challenges force us to not give up. That's my perspective.
Ya, yo sí, pues también pasé por un momento bien difícil cuando
I
hice
also went through a
estallido
very
anticomunista.
difficult experience, specifically when I
Personalmente
was
estaba
working
pasando
with
por
this
un momento,
arpillera.
creo que por uno de los
Personally,
momentos más
I was
difíciles de mi
going through
vida
one of the most difficult times in my life.
a nivel personal. Eh, Estaba dejando
It was very
Argentina,
difficult for me personally. I was leaving
prácticamente
Argentina.
en la calle sola
I was on the
después del
street
estallido
on my
social.
own after the
Eh,
social
También el
uprising.
estallido social para mí fue
And
muy
that
terrible
social
porque yo
uprising
en
was
mi
very
familia
difficult for me because in my
tuve a mi
family,
abuelo que fue exiliado político de la
my
dictadura
grandfather
de
was a
Pinochet.
political
Mi
exile
abuelo
during
en
the
esos años
dictatorship, and
quedó
my
ciego
grandfather was
por
left
un
blind
atentado, accidente, una situación
due
extraña
to
que
a
nunca
strange
supimos qué
event,
había
an
pasado, pero
attack or an
probablemente fue una
accident. We never
emboscada.
knew exactly what happened. It was mostly
Entonces para mí fue muy
an
terrible
attempted
ver
attack. And
que
so
el
for
estallido
me, it was
social había
very
gente que
hurtful
estaba
to see
perdiendo
that during the social uprising, there were people who were losing their sight.
esa situación. Para mí fue súper, súper
That
dolorosa
situation was very, very
porque
painful for
a
me
mi familia la marcó mucho
because
el
it
hecho de que mi abuelo fuera una
impacted my
persona
family. The fact that my
y que su abuela tenía
grandfather
que ir
was
exiliado
left
sin
blind
poder
and that he had to go into
etcétera.
exile when he
Toda
was
esa
young.
arpillera fue hecha en un
So
contexto
that
personal muy
arpillera
difícil
was something I did during a
y
very difficult
un poco me
personal
salvó la vida, yo
time.
siento.
And in a way, I think it saved my
Estar
life
trabajando, estar bordando, como les
because it
decía,
was
estos
a way
retrasos
that I
de
could
tela se
continue
transforman
working,
como en
continue
pedazos de
sleeping.
emociones que una va reparando, que una va
Because as
uniendo
I
y
was
que todo eso
saying, it's sort of a
también
way
a
of
nivel
emotions, of
interno,
laying them out
propias
and
emociones de una que a lo mejor también eran
externalizing
desechos, desperdicios, una
those
la junta
emotions. Our emotions
y
are
se
sort of like
rearma a uno
scraps of
mismo.
cloths that can be gathered and
Entonces,
rebuilt, and then
ahora hace
help
poco cuando tuve que
me to
enviar la
rebuild
arpillera
myself.
a
And
Canadá,
recently, when I
que
had
me
to send
pasó
the
algo que no me
arpillera
imaginaba que
to
me iba a pasar,
Canada, something happened to
me
me that
puse
I
muy
wasn't
triste
expecting. I
y
started to feel incredibly
sentía como que me
sad,
estaban sacando algo
and
de
I
las
felt like
entrañas.
they were
A
taking
pesar de
something
que yo la hice en un momento que
out of
para mí fue
myself.
muy difícil, como que yo no quería
But as
hacerlo
a
con ese
fact
dolor,
that I created it when
como que era
times were really
algo
difficult, in a way, I
que
didn't
yo
want
había
to let
sacado de
go of
tan
that pain.
profundo dentro mío
It's
que cuando
something
la
that was
mandé a Canadá
deep inside of me,
me
that came
dio
from
como
so
si
deep inside
pararan
of me,
ese
that when
dolor
I
igual, fue muy
sent it to
extraño.
Canada,
Después ya lo
it was very
pensé y
painful
dije,
to
bueno, quizás
separate
sirve
myself.
como
And
para cerrar un
afterwards,
ciclo y todo.
I thought about it and thought maybe it's
También otra de las
closing a cycle, a
cosas que me
circle.
salvó la vida y
Something
me hace
else that
muy feliz
saved
a
my life
propósito
and that
de la
has
pregunta
made me very happy, and this is in relation to the
fue el
question,
proyecto de trenza textil
was the
y
project
mis
of
alumnos.
Trenza Textil, the
De
school I did
verdad, eso me
with my
salvó la
students.
vida
That also
porque
saved my life
fue el estallido social y
because there
después
was
vino
the
la
social
pandemia y
uprising
para
and
los
then there was the
profesionales en Chile
pandemic.
como que
So
fue,
for
nos
people in
llovió
Chile,
sobre mojado, fue muy
it
difícil
was
todo ese año, todos esos
pouring
meses.
while it was raining, so
Entonces
to
yo
speak.
también le
And
agradecía lo que contaba Erika, vino la pandemia y me quedé sin
like
trabajo.
as Erika
En ese
mentioned,
momento
when the
trabajaba en una
pandemic
galería de
started,
arte
I
que me estaba yendo bien, yo
my
estaba
work. I
contenta y de un
used to
momento
work
a
in an
otro
art gallery where I was
todo
happy, where things were
tuve que
going well. And
empezar a
then
dar
one
clases
day to the next,
virtuales
they
porque
closed everything, and I
estaba
started
sola en
had to
Argentina y
give
tenía que
classes
pagar
online.
el alquiler,
I was
el
alone in
arriendo.
Argentina. I had to pay rent
Entonces ahí empecé a dar clases
food.
y claro que
And so
para mí
that's
fue
how I
muy
started
hermoso
to
en
teach
poder
classes, and a
ver
beautiful world opened up to me.
todo el mundo
I
de
started
otros
to
países.
meet women from
Por
all
eso
over
les
the
decía
world,
también que
from
este concepto de
different
trenza
countries. And
textil
that's
es
why I was saying
importante,
that this concept of
entrevistarnos con
braiding
mujeres de
is
distintos
so
lugares,
important for me because it's about braiding
porque
with
a
women
pesar de que era
from
virtual,
different
se
parts of the
sentía
world. And
también
in
esa
spite of the
comunidad.
fact that it was virtual, I could
Entonces,
feel that I was
realmente a
in community.
mí dar clases y las
And so
alumnas me
for
salvaron la
me
vida
to teach, to give
en ese
classes
momento
and that the
es algo
connection
que yo
with a student saved
agradezco.
my life. It's something
Todavía,
that I'm
todavía doy
grateful
clases.
for
Quienes
to
estaban
this day.
preguntando
I
también,
still
sigo
teach
dando
classes.
clases y voy a seguir seguir con este
And
proyecto.
I'll continue working on this
Solamente
project.
por
It
pandemia,
wasn't just
se,
during the
se
pandemic.
transformó en un proyecto de vida para
It
mí.
became
Yo me voy a
a
dedicar a
life
esto
project for me,
para siempre.
and I'm going to be working on it always.
Gracias a los dos por compartirnos eso.
Thank you both for sharing.
Tengo otra pregunta aquí que dice,
I have another
me gustaría
question here
saber
that
de qué
says,
se trata el
I would
estudio
like
que
to
está
know
haciendo Erika con la Universidad de Cambridge.
what is the project about that
Sí,
Erika is
creo
working
que
on
vamos a
with
hacer hoy.
Cambridge University.
Hemos hecho
And if
varias
there's a
cosas
product,
con
if there's
Lorna.
something
Yo
I
la
could
conocí
read or see about
en
that.
Inglaterra cuando fui a
I met
exponer
Lorna
en
in
la
England
Universidad
when I
de
exposed or
doctorado,
at the London
que
School of
era en
Economics.
Ulster en aquel momento, y
And
ahora
I think
en
she was
Cambridge.
doing her PhD at Ulster at the
Hemos
time.
escrito algunos artículos para British Academy y
And there are a few
para
articles that have been written for the British
de
Academy
nombre,
and for an
todavía más
encyclopedia. I don't remember the
antiguo,
name. We're still
sobre
putting
arte
it
textil.
together
A mí me corresponde
about
escribir
textile
justamente
art.
sobre
And I
artistas textiles y arpilleristas
will
chilenos.
be writing about
Ese es
textile
uno de los
artists
productos
and
concretos que
artilleristas
hemos
in
hecho en
Chile.
conjunto con
That's
Lorna.
one of a
Otro es
concrete
que
example of the work with
también
Lorna
hemos
at
puesto
the University of Cambridge.
en el Murray University College, por si alguien no lo sabe, y no tiene por qué saberlo tampoco, porque ni yo lo sabía, aún estando parada ahí no sabía dónde estaba parada. El Murray University College es el lugar de artes visuales más,
We've
una
also
colección de mujeres artistas visuales más importantes
exhibited
de Reino Unido, y por
at a
tanto,
center with the most
Cambridge
important
es
collection of
un
textile
colegio donde
artists,
solamente estudian mujeres además.
and it's a college
Entonces,
where women study.
también lo que hicimos, hemos hecho algunas exposiciones en conjunto. Nosotros hicimos
We've
una
had some
exposición
joint
internacional
exhibits. We did an exhibit for the United Nations,
una exposición que también tiene una visualización digital, ¿verdad? En Kunstmarkt.
and that exhibit also
Una
has a
presentación
digital
en
component.
inglés. Estamos haciendo también investigaciones sobre
We're
la
also
relación
performing
entre
research
paper que estamos trabajando juntas que tienen que ver
and
justamente con la
working on
relación
different
con los
papers
objetivos de desarrollo sostenible.
about
Y estamos
sustainable
armando una investigación
development
del
and
Centro
embroidery.
Nacional de Arte
And
Contemporáneo
we're
acá en Chile.
also
En Chile,
working with the Contemporary Art Institute
en
here
ese
in
espacio,
Chile.
un espacio que para mí es súper importante, sobre todo señalando que en realidad las mujeres artistas y feministas son muchas.
There are a
Que uno no
lot
las
of
conozca es
women
otra cosa.
artists,
Y una de las cosas que es
feminist
importante
artists.
reconocer en tanto
And I think it's important
de
to
artistas feministas y
recognize
mujeres es Archiva. Archiva es
or
un
talk about
catálogo de
Archiva.
artistas
Archiva is a
que existía,
catalog
después
of
de ahora el registro de las
artists.
mujeres luchando en la calle existen fotógrafas, existían
There are
literatas,
photographers,
existen
writers,
escultoras, existen artistas
sculptors,
performance, y eso existe en
performance
archivo, claro,
artists,
por supuesto no están
and
conocidos,
that is all
y
part
también
of
la invitación es que
Archiva.
otros países también los hagan, a tener los nombres. Creo que el primer acto
It's important to
feminista
have a record of
es nombrar,
women
y
artists.
que
And the
principalmente quienes se
first
dedican a estudiar
step
las
of
artes sepan que esas mujeres
feminist
existieron.
action
Y
is
para eso
to
tienen el
name. It's
honor de
important to
ser
know that
parte de
those
Archiva,
women
de este
existed.
registro de mujeres
Memorarte is part of
feministas. Y
this
con Lorna Dillon
catalog
justamente
of
eso.
feminist artists.
Lorna Dillon de Cambridge vino al
Lorna
Congreso
Dillon
Internacional de Arte Textil y Resistencia que organizó Memorarte junto con diferentes
participated in an
países.
event that we
También es una de las
organized,
cosas en las que generamos alianzas. No
and
nos
we have a
interesa
lot
que
of
no me interesa
alliances
ser una
like
artista
that.
conocida, no me interesa que
I'm not
sea el mejor
interested
grupo de
in being
bordadores,
a
lo que sí me
well-known
interesa
artist or
es
being the
poder
best group
visibilizar
of
a otras
embroiderists.
compañeras
What I'm
artistas.
interested in is
Ese para
bringing
mí es
visibility to other women
objetivo
artists as
principal
well. That is the main
por eso
purpose
para mí es súper
of
importante que
Memorarte
en otros
for me.
lugares
That's why it's so
la
important
gente
for me,
pueda vivir mejor. Si en el
for
fondo no es
people
que
to
se
be
vuelvan
able to live
artistas, no es que
better.
sean
It's not
las mejores
necessarily
bordadoras del mundo, es que
becoming
puedan en esos
artists or the
encuentros de
best
mujeres tener mejores
embroiderers,
vidas,
but
aun cuando el sistema sea
the
hostil,
right that women
eso
have
aprendimos de las
to
bordadoras
a better
mujeres.
life, even in a
Una de mis
hostile
mejores amigas que
context.
estaba justamente en
That's
la
what we've learned.
presentación de Tamara eran las piezas de Victoria Díaz. Su papá es detenido desaparecido, su hermana Premio Nacional de Derechos Humanos, y lo que describe en ella estos espacios
And what
protegidos
they
con
described,
tanto
they talk
dolor,
about a
porque
protected
efectivamente tú sientes
space where there was so
abrazo,
much pain,
por así decirlo, en el espacio creativo.
and the importance of creative space.
Thank you so much. So we have 5 more minutes. So Cecily, I know we have closing remarks. Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah,
I think
we can.
still have like 3, but
I think we have 2 more
Oh.
questions. I quickly run through those before closing remarks.
okay. So I'm just gonna read the last two. So Erika and Tamara, both from Claudia. As far as you understand it and have experienced it, what is the view or feeling of original artilleristas from the time of the dictatorship of this maintenance, expansion, and what feels like a resurgence in this art, voice, and resistance? And I guess I also wanted to mention that Bélica Castro is part of Hilos Conductores. So thank you for asking this question. Yes.
Bueno, para mí, las artilleristas de la dictadura
For me,
de la
artilleristas
dictadura
from the period of dictatorship,
son una fuente de inspiración.
for me, they're a source of
Como les
enormous
decía
inspiration.
también antes, las arpilleras fueron las que me
As I was
abrieron
saying, the arpilleras
las puertas al mundo de
opened
la
the doors
textil.
to me, to the
A
world of
partir de
textile
ellas yo
art.
empecé a estudiar todo
It
lo
was
que
thanks
tiene
to
que ver
them
con
that I
arte.
started
Creo que
studying
tienen
textile art,
características
and
muy valiosas
they have
que
very
pueden
valuable
también
elements
servir para nuestra vida.
which
Como
are
les
useful
decía,
in our
el hecho
lives.
de que siempre trabajaron en comunidad,
They always
estos
worked in
espacios
community,
de
for example.
contención de mujeres, que también les comentaba que llama mucho la
Women worked
atención que
together.
incluso hoy en día faltan esos espacios de
And even
contención
today,
a
there's a
nivel de
lack of
clase y
spaces, a
luego
lack of
mis
spaces
alumnas
where
tienen que
women can
elegir
come
una
together
historia
and
relevante
reflect.
de sus vidas
As
para
I
mostrar.
shared when I
Hay
asked my
muchas que se
students
quedan en
to have a
blanco porque
story
nunca
to
se han
share,
detenido a
a lot of
pensar
them
en algo importante de sus
can't think of
vidas.
anything
Hay
because
otras
they've
que
never had the
lloran
time
porque
or
se dan
space
cuenta que
to
nunca han
reflect on
tenido
their
el
own
espacio
lives.
o el
Many of them
tiempo para
cry because
pensar
they
en
say
ellas
they've never had the
mismas, por
time or
su
space
maternidad, por
to
sus
think
trabajos, o
about
se han
their
dejado de lado a ellas
themselves
mismas.
because their mothers or because they work.
Entonces, uy, se me apagó la luz.
My light
Entonces,
turned off.
creo que en ese sentido siguen siendo muy importantes para
So
nosotras
I
hoy en
think
día,
that
para
the original
nunca
architects
olvidarnos de
are very
lo
important for
importante
us
que
today
es
because
estar juntas,
they'll help
de
us
no
to
perder el
remember how
rumbo.
important it is to be together and to support each
Yo
other.
quiero poner quizás un punto de clivaje un tanto menos romántico. Yo creo que las
Erika says,
arpilleristas,
I'd like to say
como
something
bordado
perhaps
puro
not as
no
romantic.
existía.
I think that the
Hay
artilleristas,
arpilleristas que tenían una relación con el bordado que era mucho más
some of
política.
them
Y
had a
quizás la
much more
cercanía
political
ideológica,
relationship
el
with
acercamiento
embroidery.
a sufrimientos en particular que tenían que ver con el quehacer
They had to do
partidario, hacía que
with
la naturaleza
suffering,
creativa, a lo menos eso sirviera como instrumento de análisis. Porque
and that could be
existían
a tool
otras
of analysis.
que bordaban para comer.
There were other
Y cuando
women
bordaban
who
para comer,
embroidered
muchas de esas
to eat
producciones
because
que
they needed to
conocemos
survive.
manejaba la vicaría, a quien uno no puede sino tener un gran respeto moral, era la iglesia buena, ¿verdad?
And there's a
Pero la
lot of
vicaría
respect
tenía a la vez
for the
gente que
church
trabajaba con
here
ellos, que eran intermediarios.
and
Esos
the church
intermediarios
for
hacían muchas
intermediaries,
veces bordar a las mujeres y todas las
and they
mujeres
would make
saben, pueden
women
saber, y
embroider.
algunas piezas no les gustaba y
And
las
some of
tiraban
those
para atrás.
and they didn't
Pero
like
muchas
some of
veces
those
también
pieces, and
eso
they
quiere
would
decir
throw them
que
away. And that
esa
means that
semana
that
no iba a comer.
person wouldn't be
¿Sí?
able to eat that week.
Entonces, habían ciertas condiciones que emulaban también esta
There were
diferencia entre Chile y
certain
desigual. El
conditions
bordar por
that
el simple
led
placer
to
de sí
inequality.
y el
Some
bordar para
people
comer
would
daban como
embroider because of
distintos modos
pleasure,
de creación.
and other
¿Sí?
people would embroider because they
Por lo
need the
tanto,
money to eat.
es una visión de análisis y es súper reiterativa. De hecho, yo cuando escuché el primer relato de eso, yo dije, oye,
When I first
ya,
heard a
quizás
story
va a
about
suceder
that, it
que
made
aquí
me
se puede bordar
reflect.
en varias
And then I
partes.
started
La
to
vicaría,
ask.
la vicaría es la iglesia católica, ¿sí? Que en ese
The
tiempo tenía un
Catholic
compromiso
Church
político muy
had
importante
a very important
con los
political
que
commitment
luchaban
at the
contra
time
Pinochet.
with those who were
Y
fighting
una
against
constante,
Pinochet.
que uno incluso,
And
y además no eran tan bien pagadas comparadas con cómo se
they
vendían.
weren't very well
También
paid
eran
in
condiciones
terms
bien
of,
precarias. Claro,
they
porque
lived
como
in a
yo no
condition
tengo
of
que comer, si me
precarity.
pagan 5.000 pesos, no sé, si me pagan
They would
5
make
dólares, ya son 5 dólares que no tengo.
$5
Por
and
lo tanto, eso también es importante a la hora de
it's
analizar. Y de
very
hecho,
important
de
in an
hecho, cuando
analysis.
tú le preguntas a las
And in
personas, a los
fact,
bordadores,
when
yo
you
vivo
ask
en un lugar muy
people
sencillo,
or
vivo en la zona
embroiders, I
antigua de
live
Esquivel.
in
Por
a
lo tanto, conozco
very
de cerca a
simple
muchos
place.
bordadores antiguos.
I know a lot of
Incluso cuando tú
women
les entrevistas, tú
embroider,
vas a
and when
preguntar
you
por trabajo y ellos
interview
no te
them,
van
and
a
I
decir,
interview them,
por
for
favor, no
example, with
digas eso.
Lorna,
Te lo
and they
conté,
say,
pero no
please
digas
don't
yo lo
say
dije.
that.
Porque
Don't
por
tell
más que les
anyone
ponga
that
la
I
atención,
told
y
you
eso
that
para
because
mí es
I don't want to
maravilloso.
come across
Porque en el fondo
as
también es decir,
ungrateful. And
cresta.
That really stood out for me. There were people who would buy arpilleras and they were working in a condition of precarity and they would sell them for more money. And we knew that they were selling them for more money. But the women were not making that much money. There's a lot of inequality in Chile, also in creative spaces and also in terms of how these arpilleras are sold. So artilleristas and arpilleras, well, not all the same.
Gracias. Y disculpen, tuve que quitar el video porque estaba
Thank
nuevamente
you. My
haciendo.
apologies. I had to turn off my video because I was having problems with the camera.
La última pregunta y con esto
The
cerramos.
last question.
Tenemos tiempo, Cecily.
Do we have time,
The
Cecily?
last question. I know it's we're on time. But...
Yes, we
Okay.
can do this.
Sí, sí tenemos tiempo para la última pregunta.
Okay. Quería preguntarles por esta concepción de los textiles como seres vivos, ¿cómo es
In
esta
terms of the
conversación con los
textiles as
materiales para
living
darles
beings,
forma cuando se teje? Y creo que ahí se refiere sobre todo
what
a
is this
Tamara,
conversation like with the materials
hablar un poquito sobre
to
eso.
give them shape when they're being
Es
created?
súper interesante. Yo doy un curso
It's
completo
very,
sobre
very
esto,
interesting. I have an entire
sobre todo
course
se da en
that
los
talks about
Andes
this,
y
where you
en
see it in the
los-
Andes
en los
and
pueblos
in
precolombinos
Mexico,
que
in
tienen
indigenous
esta
communities.
idea de que la mujer es tejedora,
They have the concept of the woman,
tejedora
of women
por sí, o
as
sea,
a weaver,
viene como tejedora, porque al ser capaz
that
de
women are innate
dar vida,
weavers
la
because
mujer ya
women
está
are
tejiendo
able to give
una
life
vida en su útero. O sea,
so
está
that
tejiendo
women
un ser vivo,
weave
está
a
tejiendo los
life
tejidos de
in
ese
their
ser vivo.
womb.
Entonces, ellas dicen que el tejer es algo innato
They
de la
say
mujer,
that
que
weaving
el
is
tejer
something
es como
that's
dar vida.
innate to
Entonces,
being a
ellas
woman.
al
Weaving is
trasladar
like giving
esta
life.
capacidad de su útero de crear tejido, al crear un tejido con lana, como afuera,
So when they create a
también están
textile,
dando
for
vida.
example, with wool,
Tiene
they're
también
also
que
giving
ver
life,
con
much the way that
la
they weave
concepción
together
de
the
la vida,
tissue with
porque
a child in their womb.
todo el proceso de creación de un tejido pasa
The
por
process of
muerte,
creating in a
vida,
textile
vida.
goes
Es un
through
ciclo
death, life, and
eterno,
rebirth.
que tiene
It's
que ver
an
también con la
eternal
concepción
cycle,
del tiempo que no
and
es
it has
lineal.
to
O sea,
do with
para
a
los pueblos
concept of time that's
precolombinos
not
la vida no se
linear.
acaba con la
For
muerte,
indigenous
sino que
communities,
se
life
vive ese
doesn't
ciclo eterno
end
de
with
vida,
death.
muerte,
It's an
renacimiento.
eternal cycle
Entonces,
of
lo voy a
life,
contar
death,
muy rápido.
rebirth.
En los Andes, por ejemplo,
In the Andes, for
cuando se
example,
extrae la lana del animal,
when
la
wool
fibra está muriendo.
is taken from an animal, the
Entonces,
fiber is dying.
ya sacada de la fibra del animal, empieza un proceso de muerte. Cuando
There's
la
a
mujer empieza a
process of
limpiar con la
death
mano,
that
le empieza a
starts
sacar
after it's
el
taken from the
calor, la
animal. The woman
humedad, la
will
fibra
clean
se
it,
empieza a
will
enfriar, a secar,
wool
ya
starts
está
to become
muriendo. La
cold, it
mujer
loses
está
heat,
ayudando a morir.
it's dying,
Pero
and the woman
luego,
is
cuando se
helping it
empieza
to
a
die.
teñir
Then,
con las plantas del
when it's
territorio, con el
dyed
agua, con el
with
calor,
plants from
nuevamente
the
se le está
territory, with heat,
empezando a infundir de vida.
new
Y
life
después ya
is
cuando la
being
mujer la
added
está
to it,
tejiendo, cuando
breathed into
termina
it.
de tejer,
And then
ya
when the
ese
woman is
tejido
weaving
terminado
it,
es un ser vivo.
finishing the textile,
Incluso es un
that
ser vivo que
textile
tiene
itself is a
personalidad,
living
que
being.
interactúa con la comunidad.
It's a living being that
Muy, muy
interacts with the
interesante.
community.
Por eso también
It's very,
un
very
tejido nunca
interesting.
se bota a la basura.
That's
Nunca
why
se
a
tira a la
textile
basura, sino que
is
se
never
quema.
thrown in the
Un
garbage.
textil, un
It's burned.
tejido, un
A
poncho que ya
textile,
cumplió su
poncho
vida, no se tira a la basura, sino que se quema y
is
se
not
devuelve
thrown
a la
away,
madre
but
tierra.
burned, so that it
Entonces ahí
can go back
nuevamente
to
empieza
Mother
ese
Earth.
ciclo de vida,
And that
muerte,
cycle
renacimiento.
starts
Es
again
muy
of
lindo.
life, death, and
Pero
rebirth.
es una concepción
Something beautiful.
precolombina.
And
Por eso a
it's
mí
an
también me interesó
indigenous
mucho lo
concept.
precolombino,
That's why
porque
I'm
podemos
very
entender
interested
este
in
tipo de
learning more
cosas
about
que
the
son muy diferentes a
indigenous
como las vemos
perspective. There's so much
ahora.
to learn. It's so different than how we see
En
things.
particular, yo no tejo, no tengo la relación con la materialidad que describe la
Erica
Tamara,
says,
porque no es
I
mi profesión,
don't,
de hecho tampoco
I
bordo,
don't
no
weave.
ensamblo tela.
In
Es
fact,
súper
actually, I
interesante lo que
take
dices, porque,
cloth
por
apart.
ejemplo, en los Andes también
Tamara says
no
in the
existe esa
Andes,
diferencia de
there
tejido,
isn't a difference
bordado o
between
costura, o no les
weaving,
importa, por ejemplo, en los
stitching,
trajes de
sewing, or
carnaval,
embroidery,
muchas veces tienen
and
brillo
the
y
clothes that
plástico que
they
son muy
have for
sintéticos,
carnival,
los tratan de la misma
they,
forma.
they might be very
O sea,
synthetic
no hay
and use synthetic
diferencia
material, but they
entre un
treat them in the
textil
exact same
que está
way.
hecho
They
con
don't
fibras naturales
differentiate
a un
between
textil
a
que está
textile with
hecho
natural fibers,
con fibras
textile
sintéticas.
that's
De
made
todas
with
formas,
synthetic
es un ser
fibers.
vivo y lo tratan de la misma forma.
they consider it a
también
living
mi
being and treat it in the
acercamiento
same.
está más situado, creo yo, en la urgencia.
Erica
Bueno,
says,
¿qué es
my
ser vivo y qué es
experience,
ser humano? Hay 50.000 acercamientos
it
desde lo
says,
cognitivo,
well,
de
it
lo
depends how
estético,
you
de
define
lo
what a
jurídico.
living being
Yo más
is
bien me
and what
sitúo en la
human being is. There's
emergencia.
so many ways to
¿Por qué
look
lo
at
digo
it.
así? Porque mi relación con la materialidad más bien tiene que ver con
My relationship with
el momento en que se
materiality
necesita
has to do
reaccionar y
with the
cuán rápido
moment
tengo que
where
ser
you
para
have
expresar
to
una idea.
react
Y si para
immediately to
eso hay
express an
materiales
idea.
recyclables, y para eso hay
And
que
you can use
rearmar algo,
recyclable
si el cemento
material,
se
or you
consigue muy
can
barato, o por esas razones de la vida. Por ejemplo, ahora
use a
compramos por primera
very
vez un
cheap
metro de
thread,
tierra
or
por
for the
15.000 pesos,
first
que es
time,
carísimo,
we
15
bought
por
a
15
piece
dólares,
of
tierra flexible para
material
que se note en la
that
cancha,
is
y lo pudimos comprar
very,
porque no
very
se nos da una obra
expensive.
y simplemente trabajamos con
But if we can't
retazos
buy it,
de,
then
no
we
sé, hay
just
una obra que
work
mostró
with
ahí la Natalia, que
scraps.
son como 102
There's
palomas
a piece
vacías que
that
representan la
Natalia
destrucción,
showed, which are
forman
102
una
empty
paloma que está aquí
doves,
en
which
en la
represent
memoria de nosotros,
absence, and
cosa que
it
no existe
speaks
pero
about
existe.
memory. It's something that doesn't
Pero nuestro
exist, but
acercamiento a
does
la materia,
exist.
desde mi punto de vista,
From my
súper
perspective,
respetable, y obviamente adhiero además porque soy muy respetuosa de las como visiones de los pueblos originarios, es
I
la urgencia.
respect
Entonces,
the
para mí el ser
indigenous
humano
perspective as
principal
well, but for
es
me,
ser
the
viviente, es ser
urgency
humano.
and
Y ser
immediacy
humano tiene que ver
is
con la
what's most
capacidad que
important.
no
And
tiene
as a
ninguna otra
human
especie, que es la de
being,
comunicar, y en el caso de nosotros en particular es rápido. O sea,
we
nosotros
need
un
to
lienzo tiene que ser a
communicate
veces
quickly and
imprimido y
immediately.
ir al tiro.
Sometimes we have to create a
Entonces
piece
no
in
hay como
2 days
mucho
because we
reparo con
have
la
to bring
materialidad,
it to
sino
the
más bien cómo
street
se ve.
in 3
No
days.
hay
So for us,
ninguna
what's most
diferencia
important is
de
how
nada.
it
Es
looks.
cómo hago que esto sea. Y lo que le enseñamos a todas nuestras
And
compañeras es
what we
hacer
teach
trabajar lo
the
menos
women
visible para
is
generar un impacto visual más rápido.
how to have a
Por lo
visual
tanto,
impact as quickly as
porque lo que
possible.
necesitamos es poder tener una
Because what we
respuesta
need is to be able to
artístico-política en el
have
escenario que es la
artistic
calle, y no
and
tenemos tiempo de
political
todas, además
response
de guardar así como
immediately
los
on the
ojos.
street because we
Entonces,
don't have
esa
time. We
relación
all have other things to do apart
con
from
qué pieza es un ser vivo en la medida
embroidering.
que logre incidir en las decisiones
So for
políticas.
us,
Esa es
it's
la medida
a living
en la
being
que
in as
nosotros
far as it
visualizamos
can have an
o le damos
impact
valor
change in the
público o
context of the
precio a una
street.
pieza creada por
That's how
Memorarte, y
we
es
give
lo que también
public
enseñamos. Tenemos
value
diferentes
to a piece.
orientaciones.
That's what we
No quiere
share.
decir que una sea
So
mejor
there's
que la
different
otra, pero sí diferentes
perspectives. So
acercamientos.
Tamara's
Tienes
and
este
mine,
pedazo de
it's not that
papel,
one is
tienes este
right or
pedazo de
wrong, but
cartel,
we just
tienes
have
este pedazo de pañuelo. Sí,
different ways of
¿Cuánto
approaching it.
tiempo tienes que hacerlo? ¿Lo vas a hacer? ¿Cuántas puntas
For
de
us,
podemos
it's
pasar
very
para que eso
quickly to
resulte? Eso que
create
queremos
something
realizar.
quickly and for
Por
it
tanto,
to
el
be
énfasis
ready
reflexivo es
quickly.
mucho más rápido en esa inmediatez, porque,
So we
no
put an
sé,
emphasis
están
on
torturando a alguien en
immediacy.
otro país
For
por,
example,
no
if
sé,
they're torturing
la sacaron de
someone,
Nicaragua. No tenemos 2
another
semanas para hacer
country
esos alfileres.
that's connected to
Inmediatamente tiene que ser
Nicaragua,
mañana la resolución.
we don't have 2
Entonces,
weeks to
la
create
reflexión
the
es cómo lo
RPA.
hago rápido.
We have to do it immediately. And so for us, the challenge is how can we do it quickly from one day to the next?
Thank you so much. And we'll turn back to Cecily, who is going to close the event.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of your very thoughtful questions. I know that, this is a late event, so I appreciate you sticking around and asking those questions. And a big thank you to Erika and Tamara for taking the time to present and to answer these questions. Thank you, Natalia, for facilitating the questions at the end there. And thank you to Paulina for translating, of course. In terms of closing remarks, I would just like to quickly announce some of the upcoming events at the gallery that are in relations to this exhibition. This exhibition, Hilos Conductores, is on view until April 1st. So if you're able to come to the gallery and see it in person, I encourage you to do so. And if not, as Natalia mentioned earlier, this will be imagined virtually. So you could visit this exhibition virtually later on. Oops, lost my place there. So Hilos Conductores will remain on view until April 1st. As I mentioned, it is curated by Natalia Santos Ocasio with the work of Belgica Castro, Soledad Muñoz, Tamara Marcos, Memorarte, Autoretazo, and the work of the Jubilee Craft Collective. We hope to see you at our next event, which is the walking tour from Sir Gallery to the Textile Museum of Canada, led by Natalia and Soledad on Saturday, April 1st from 2 to 5:30 p.m., as well as our next online event, which is the Latin American Speaker Series with Tatiana Flores on March 30th at 7 p.m. ET. As well, Natalia will be hosting another talk with Belgica through studies in national and international development through Queen's University on Thursday, March 16th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. And please note that if you wish to visit the gallery in the upcoming weeks, we are open on Thursdays and Fridays, 12 to 6, and Saturdays from 11 to 5. For the full listing of all the programming for this exhibition, you can also visit our website. And if you would like to receive further information about these events or other events we organize, I urge you to contact us to be added to our newsletter, as well as to follow us on social media with the handle Sir Gallery on most platforms and Le Cap Arts on Twitter. And without further ado, I bid you all a good night. Thank you all again for spending the last 2 hours with us.
Muchas gracias a ustedes por la invitación.
Muchas gracias. Que tengan linda noche.